first episode, The Freshman, was written and directed by Joss Whedon. It picks up a few months after the events of last season, with Sunnydale High being blown up and most of the cast moving on to college. Overall, it's a fine episode, if a little repetitive, with a decent villain, and it serves as a decent jumping off point for a few storylines. Compared to Anne, it comes out far behind, but as an average premiere episode, it works. The episode is largely about changes. Buffy, Willow, and Oz are all starting their new college life, but the focus for now is on Buffy. She's overwhelmed, with emphasis put on the sheer size of the college campus. She's ambushed by people handing out flyers, frat initiations, and contradictory instructions about where to go. It's a relatively accurate picture of how moving to a new school or starting a new job can be like. The problem is the same idea is repeated in every scene for the first 15 or so minutes. After her initial walk across campus, Buffy encounters Willow, who is having the time of her life, in a place that rewards studying and knowledge. Similarly, when they encounter the library, she is the picture of joy, whereas Buffy clearly yearns for something smaller. Next, Buffy forgets how basic human conversation works while she's introduced to Riley, a TA in one of her classes. Willow immediately starts in with nerd talk, and Buffy is reduced to sentences that are barely English. While her introduction to her roommate is not quite as uncomfortable, it's still awkward. Next is the most overblown scene of the episode, where Buffy is thrown out of class for quietly asking her neighbor if the class is full. While some professors are assholes, this is an unnecessary scene that feels unrealistic and is not needed. It merely reinforces themes that have already been pushed extremely hard. The villain of the episode is then introduced, a pack of vampires led by Sunday. They're a decently fun group, making fun of the typical college students, just like high schoolers were satirized in the previous 3 seasons. They've been killing students for years now, and when Buffy needs help investigating them, she goes to Giles. He is, however, in full bachelor mode, trying to keep his distance and live his own life. However, it's quickly shown that he's not made for the sedentary lifestyle, as he ends up buying the magic box this season. In this episode, however, he's trying to balance his own responsibilities versus Buffy's independence, especially since he's not going with her to school. This becomes a central conflict in later seasons, wanting to parent but not baby, although he doesn't always make the right decisions. Buffy feels lost after being rejected by him, and ends up being beaten up by the vampires she was looking for. With a broken arm, she runs back home, but finds her mom has filled up her room with stuff. A lot of this is a very typical college experience, but because it's so compressed, it feels a bit repetitive and dull. The vampires raid her room and steal her stuff, and Buffy ends up at the Bronze where she meets up with Xander. He's similarly a bit lost, having ended his cross-country journey in the same state after his car broke down. Despite this, he offers encouragement to Buffy, cementing himself as the heart of the group. The two head off after the vampires, and Buffy slays them, as she's wont to do. In the end, Giles arrives to help, but it's already been handled. The final scene of the episode depicts one of the survivors of the group running into a group of military men with some kind of stun weapons, which will end up being the main plot of the season. While the episode certainly establishes the main themes of the season, identity, it does so in a clumsy and overwrought way. While we've seen a little bit of Giles' arc and a larger amount of Buffy's, Oz, Willow, and Xander have fallen by the wayside. Riley is introduced and will go on to be a major character, but for now we know very little about him. Overall, the episode is functional, establishing the season, but doing little beyond that. Living Conditions is the second episode of the season, and unfortunately it's another lackluster affair. The whole episode can be summed up by the tagline, "What if your roommate was a demon?" Like a Goosebumps book. Now that's true for a lot of Buffy episodes, and the genre fare in general, but many take that simple concept and then expand on it, taking it in interesting directions and use it to develop the characters, and demonstrate the themes of the season. This one, however, does not. It feels a lot like a Season 1 episode in that it's the most banal take on a supernatural creature, with repetitive commentary about whatever cliché it's discussing. Like the Hyena Pack episode, or the Mantis one. While that was relatively excusable early on, they were still finding their voice after all. Here there's no such justification. It really feels like Season 4 stumbles right out of the gates because of the immense desire to do all the college stuff all at once. And in a lot of ways, college does feel like that, overwhelming for a while, then everything simply becomes routine. And these first couple of episodes haven't reached that stage. But that doesn't make it entertaining viewing. As for the actual plot of the episode, it starts off with Buffy at odds with her roommate Kathy. We were introduced to her last episode, where she seemed nice enough. Now, however, the little idiosyncrasies that everyone has have become thorns in Buffy's side, and then she fights some demons and it gets worse. The high point of the episode is certainly her demon dreams, which are genuinely creepy and feature some neat imagery. They are, however, brief. Buffy then begins to act out of character, annoyed at the littlest things, and then decides that Kathy is not just annoying, but evil, and has to be killed. Haha, hasn't everyone felt that way about someone they're living with? In the end of the episode, it turns out that A, Buffy is right and Kathy is actually a demon, although she was trying to live a normal college life, and B, she was literally sucking the soul out of Buffy's body, causing the odd behavior. While that does explain the extreme changes, it still feels like a bit of a cop-out. The only other notable thing is the brief introduction of Veronica, who was spies while running around campus. This won't be resolved for a few episodes, but it's a nice little bit of foreshadowing. Overall, Living Conditions is just a very subpar episode of Buffy, without much new to offer. There are a few hints at things that'll come up later in the season, but overall it feels very skippable, and just serves to get Buffy and Willow in the same room. Luckily, the season picks up very soon in the next episode. The Harsh Light of Day offers a refreshing return to form. It's an episode that has a surprising amount of character progression, offers a solid villain, and investigates a college experience without feeling cliché. The episode's focus is on Buffy and her relationship with Parker. They had shared a few brief conversations and a sidelong glance, but now they're going out, or at least hanging. He seems emotionally vulnerable, doesn't push, and is overall the perfect gentleman, exactly what Buffy was looking for after her doomed relationship with Angel. Unfortunately, it turns out he's a complete asshole, and ghosts her as soon as they have sex. Knowing this makes this whole episode feel like a ticking time bomb, and every bit of dialogue from him feels slimy. Despite this, we can still understand where Buffy is coming from, and why she fell for him. He's a sophomore, learned about how college works, but the age difference is not quite so severe as Angel's. He also manages to convince Buffy that their moving forward is her idea, that she's making all the choices and has all the power. Choices are a prominent theme this season, although they're mostly not of the relationship variety. This is an early example putting them at the forefront, however, which is something the series has always been good at. The day after they have sex is a very familiar scene. Buffy, alone, naked in a bed with scarlet covers. In this case, however, Parker returns with coffee and a smile, not a demon wearing his face. At least, that's how it first appears. He then promises Buffy he'll call her, and they'll meet up later, which are of course, lies. He's later seen flirting with another girl, who happens to be a blonde with a passive resemblance to Buffy, which tells us everything we need to know. Even at the end of the episode, Buffy is still wondering what she did wrong, and if there is still a chance to make a relationship work out. But Willow is luckily on her side, acting as a mature one of the group. That's the role she's had in the last few episodes, without really an arc or progression to speak of. The season will eventually have some major changes, but for now she's stable, predictable, status quo girl. The episode also explores other relationship dynamics, however, which are contrasted with Buffy's experience. Anya is reintroduced, having returned from fleeing a giant demon at the end of last season. She's now experiencing emotions that she hasn't had for over a millennia, and needs an outlet for them. In this case it's Xander, who is understandably confused by her forthrightness, first wanting to discuss their relationship, which previously consisted of a single date, then offering sex in order to clear both their heads. Again is the woman who pushes for physical contact, and after it's done, she takes on the role that Parker did, claiming that she's now over Xander, and they can move on with their lives. Unlike Parker, however, she's lying, trying to delude herself that she's above the basic emotions that she responded to as a demon. Much of her progression for the rest of the season, and even the series, is contrasting the nature of being human with the resistance to falling into the same traps she saw over and over again. Finally, we complete the triumvirate of relationships with Harmony. She's back, and now a vampire, as depicted in the finale of last season. She leads off strong, biting Willow and claiming her boyfriend will enact revenge, but immediately devolves into being a mewling pet when she goes back home to Spike, the villain for the episode. While he doesn't have as many interactions with the main cast this episode as Fool for Love, he still offers a dominant screen presence. It's also interesting to see him actually working, even putting on a welder's mask and using heavy machinery. It's a very different side of Spike, something that was shown briefly in Season 2, but faded away once he got injured. It shows that when he has a goal, he is actually able to set targets and execute it. He went looking for a mythical artifact, found it, and then was very close to killing the Slayer. While his taunts are not as effective as they were last time, he still wounds Buffy by highlighting the mistakes she made with Parker. Harmony is similarly wounded for believing in Spike. In this case, she is literally stabbed through the heart, as Buffy is never subtle, but it's easy to see why she would be attracted to Spike. She's the same age as Buffy, newly on her own, and experiencing a new world, that of being a vampire. Someone dark and mysterious who can guide her through it is an easy thing to latch onto, even if he's abusive both mentally and physically. With all three relationships, the women went in with the incorrect expectations and were betrayed by the men they put trust in. While there are varying degrees here, the emotions are very similar, as depicted in the final shot. Relationships are hard work, and this episode highlights the myriad of things that can go wrong. While the story here is largely self-contained, Spike comes to town, finds his MacGuffin, loses it, then apparently leaves. There are further-reaching character conflicts that shape the next few episodes, and all of the themes and emotions persist for the remainder of the season. Overall, it reminds me of why I loved Buffy in the first place. Fear itself is a great episode, and while it does little for the greater arcs of the season, it offers good insight into the characters and features more of Anya, which is always a plus. The episode is basically a remake of the season-wide episode Nightmares, which focused on the characters' fears being brought to life. Now, however, instead of clowns or becoming a vampire, they're much more grounded, like Xander's concerns about being forgotten, Buffy's of someone never loving her, and Willow of not being strong enough. First, the plot. Buffy is still heartbroken after Parker ditched her, and the gang encourage her to get out and party. Reluctantly, she agrees, and they head to a frat for a spooky fun time. Unfortunately, the frat has unwittingly carved an actual demonic sigil into the floor, and after Oz cuts himself doing some very shaky adjustments for his audio equipment, it turns all the fake scares into real ones. There's a bit of oddness here where some of the magic is personalized to the user, whereas others seem to be more generalized, and the props come to life and disappear basically at random, but Buffy's magic has never really been about consistency. Xander has had a few comments this season about being a civilian or seeming stuck in life, going from living in his parents' house to moving in the basement, seeming a step down. Anya comes into his life, points out these inadequacies, and he responds with a quip and deflection. While he pretends to be okay with the circumstances, it's clear there's something going on under the surface. In the funhouse, he turns invisible, literally, and is unable to be heard. In a way that confirms his fears, it takes the rest of the gang maybe 5 minutes to actually figure this out, with Buffy claiming it's always like him to abandon them. His arc for most of the rest of the season consists of dealing with these feelings, trying to find a place in the world, and working on his relationship with Anya. As stated previously, this is the first episode where she's really a focus. She talks to Xander about his and their future, and then when the rest of the gang is in danger, she goes to Giles and organizes a rescue operation. Part of the humor comes in twofold. The first is that her scary costume is a bunny suit. Maybe she saw Darnie Darko at the formative age of 1200. The second is that she is seemingly only concerned with Xander, not any of the other people in the house. This speaks to her larger personality. Anya is ultimately a very selfish person, who has not had to actually be a human for over a millennia. Now she's been thrust into a world which she doesn't really understand, but she's come to care for at least one thing: Xander. It's still not entirely clear why, although it's slowly revealed that it's his role as the heart of the group that got to her, in a roundabout way. Willow, on the other hand, is still dealing with the same fears she's had for years. Part of it is feeling inadequate, or not good enough. Here this takes the form of Buffy doubting her spellcasting abilities, which is compounded by the warnings that Giles has given her in previous seasons. While she claims that she is good enough and practiced, ultimately she's still an amateur, and throughout the rest of the series she'll deal with difficulties revolving around magic. Here it's her own self-doubts that cause a problem, as she successfully summons a little wisp of guiding light, but which she becomes indecisive and multiplies, becoming a swarm of buzzing insects. The use of power, knowing when and when not to use it, is a recurring theme of the season. Oz gets a pretty basic fear that'll be expanded on in a few episodes. He transforms into a werewolf, and doesn't want to. Oz is ultimately not a terribly complex character, and this makes sense, but it does feel like there was an opportunity to delve a bit deeper into his psyche that was passed up. Buffy's, on the other hand, expose her inner insecurities as she falls into a basement in front of a gravestone, which works both as her figurative hunting ground and the constant threat of death that she has to deal with as the Slayer. More than that, though, is the manifestation of one of the frat guys with a broken neck, mocking her about her friends leaving. Buffy's fear of being alone is central to her character, and drove her into some toxic relationships, as well as kept her in those. All of this is particularly raw as Parker just dumped her, and Angel left before him. The fear of being alone, of course, is one of the more universal ones, and after Buffy flees from the zombies, she reappears in the attic, where everyone else is. Again, magic is weird, but it seems like some or all of the scares they've been experiencing were just in their head, although the physical building closing off seems like not to be an actual illusion. In a moment that will later be featured in the opening, Giles busts through the door with a chainsaw, on saving duty. The ending is the one part of the episode that'll work well for some people, but not others. After Giles discovers the summoning ritual is not complete, he gives a list of things that can stop it. But first he says that destroying the symbol will, and then Buffy smashes it without hearing the rest. It turns out that it will immediately summon the demon in full. The whole timing of that is a bit suspect, but then there is a special effects show that reveals a Hellraiser-inspired monster. The only problem is, he's half a foot tall. After an episode relatively heavy on horror and depression, a comical ending can be a nice punctuation mark, a reward for surviving through it. In this case, I think they're successful, although some of that also comes from the final scene of the show, where Giles says he's translated the inscription, and the music builds up to a terrible revelation, that it said, actual size. That's one of the best jokes in the show, and makes the whole thing feel worthwhile. There's also a little nod to the season arc, as the military guys are briefly seen wandering around campus, although they're mistaken for people in costume. This fits in with what we later learn of the Initiative, who are overfunded but completely unknowledgeable about the supernatural. They would send crews out on Halloween with the assumption that all the creatures of the night would hunt then, when really they find the whole thing a bit gauche and stay in. This helps demonstrate the difference between the Watchers Council and the Initiative, old knowledge versus new. Despite all the random spooks including skeletons, ghosts, bats, and werewolves, this is the final episode of the series that doesn't feature a vampire, friendly or otherwise. There had previously been 6 episodes without the titular characters, but from here on, no more. It's also the third and last Halloween episode. Overall, it's a fantastic demonstration of Buffy at its best, with a good mix of horror, humor, human relationships, and supernatural phenomena. While it's not perfect, with a bit of odd pacing in the first act, overall it's one of the better of the season. Beer Bad is next, and it's commonly cited as one of the worst episodes of this show. The hate is overblown, however, and I think it's questionable whether it's even in the bottom 5. While the morality of the episode is certainly not great, the actual plot, humor, and character moments are pretty solid, and aside from one notable exception, it's actually one of the better constructed episodes of the season, with solid introductions and payoffs. Much of the episode is spent still dealing with the fallout of Parker, beginning with the dream sequence where Buffy imagines saving him, and him then begging her to get back together. Dreams are a frequent storytelling method in Buffy, although this is one of the less subtle ones. Still, it immediately puts us into Buffy's state of mind, and shows that even though her rational brain knows that it's over, and they are completely incompatible, the subject of the episode, the id, tells her that things can change. Xander then shows up and introduces his role in the episode, the new bartender at the university. Unfortunately, almost all the humor around him doesn't work, which is definitely a drag. There's also a noticeable lack of Anya for the next 3 episodes, which is an odd choice, given she was the best part of Xander's storylines, so we're all worse off for that. Still, his bit of pretending to light a cigarette is introduced here, reinforced later, and then comes up at the end, which demonstrates the well-thought-out plotting. While Xander is working at the bar, he's humiliated by one of the students, taunting him about their difference in education. That guy, and his group of friends, then run into Buffy and convince her to have a few drinks, which turn into quite a lot of drinks, and the main plot. In this episode, the beer they're drinking has been magically enhanced to not only dumb them down, but turn them into Neanderthals, or cavemen or something. For the guys, it physically transforms them, but for Buffy it just makes her hair a little wilder. While the message here, beer bad, is certainly avaricious, there is an element of truth to it, and that it's not that the beer is evil, but it removes inhibitions, bringing out baser desires. Given that it's magic beer, the message is also less clear, which is part of why the episode lost its funding from the Office of National Drug Control, who felt it was too outlandish to be effective propaganda. There's also the biggest flaw with the plot, that the bartender, who casually admits his brother-in-law is a warlock, gets away scot-free. There's barely even a condemnation or even negative consequences. As far as the episode is confirmed, he just kept serving the spiked beer until the end of days. It's very rare that villains on Buffy just get to walk away, and it seems like poor planning on the episode's script. In the meantime, Willow and Oz are dealing with some minor storylines. Farouk is introduced properly as the singer of a band, and Oz is drawn to her like a magnet. Instead of talking about this like adults, Willow chooses to be passive-aggressive and run away. This continues even further into the next episode, but for now the conflicts are relatively minor. When Willow is off not dealing with her problems, she encounters Parker, and they have a long and drawn-out discussion. This is a good example of Willow's character understanding how manipulative Parker is, but playing along just to humiliate him. Willow can be spiteful and rude, but in the name of protecting her friends. Parker is still an asshole here, but he gets hit on the head a few times, so at least there's some comeuppance. A lot of the comedy in this episode is slapstick, and mostly it works. Buffy smacking people, spitting on a chair, and stealing a random sandwich worked with the episode, and allows Geller to show her more comedic chops without resorting to quips. Another negative on the episode is Giles coming in and lambasting Xander for serving Buffy beer. They're all almost at drinking age anyway, and Xander says Giles can't really throw stones given the demon cult he belonged to when he was younger. Still, it did turn out the beer was cursed, so maybe it was time for a classic telling off. The conclusion of the episode works well, with the caveman accidentally starting a fire and cavewoman Buffy running off to help, showing that saving people is her primary drive, even when most of her personality is gone. This also is the great bit of her throwing a fire extinguisher into the fire. Then when Buffy's dreams come true, and Parker finally apologizes to her, she is able to dig deeper into her instincts and just smack him. Now, technically that's assault, and in view of a number of emergency personnel, but maybe it's like Ken McElroy, where everyone was there, but somehow no one saw a thing. Overall, the episode is definitely in the lower tier of Buffy, but it's not as bad as it's made out to be. The strengths of the episode are definitely its comedy, but it also develops characters more than an average monster of the week, and has some smarter moments. Wild at Heart is a difficult episode to evaluate. It does a lot of things right, but the main focus, Oz being retracted to another werewolf, has him acting extremely out of character in order to further the story. Some part of this was unfortunately meta reasons. Seth Green wanted to do movies and so asked to be written out of the show. He gave the writers enough time to add hints beforehand. Veruca has been featured twice before, but when it all comes to a head, it feels sudden. It's unfortunate that the central conflict feels haphazard, because all of the other character work that goes on is really good. Willow and Oz have a lovely romantic moment where they wake up together, and it makes the dissolution of their relationship all the more tragic, because we see how well they work. Both Buffy and Xander are given nice moments with Willow, where they reassure that nothing is wrong, and that all she needs to do is have an adult conversation with Oz, which unfortunately doesn't happen before it's too late. This is a failure on both Willow and Oz's part, but that sort of miscommunication feels out of character for both. In Season 2 it wouldn't have been, but the first few episodes of the season emphasize that Willow is the adult one in the group, understanding feelings and emotions of others and able to offer good advice. Of course, it's often the case that the problem-solver friend isn't able to deal with their own issues, so there is some truth in the portrayal. Unlike last episode, Giles' brief scenes here are good, showing that he's not dealing well with his newfound freedom. He's without a slayer, a job, and a role in life, which is ironically the exact same feelings that Xander is going through, although I don't believe they ever talk together about it. We do have the first actual discussion about the initiative, which will be a focus next episode, so he finally has a project to work on. Speaking of the military brats, Spike has come back for a very brief monologue before being captured by them, which will in turn set up his role for the remainder of the season. Onto the main plot though, after sharing some longing glances at Veruca, including a few awkward scenes at the bronze where he completely ignores Willow, Oz finally confronts her. No, scratch that, he interrupts a date with Willow to talk to her, then leaves the pair alone together to go off and be grumpy. This scene is the weakest of the episode, and that while it makes some sense that Oz is unhappy with his own emotions and wants to run away from them, typically he would stay and support Willow, or at least change their plans to include her. Instead she's left alone, wondering if she missed something. Then he and Veruca go wolfy, attack a random teacher, and then wake up the next morning. While Oz can't really be blamed for what happens while he's a werewolf, given that he doesn't normally have a penchant for eating people, what happens after is fully in his control. He has a lively debate with Veruca about what being a werewolf means and how he cages himself to avoid hurting others, but she just doesn't care. It's sort of a microcosm of the Faith-Buffy interactions from last season. While Oz does shut her down, there's definitely some animal feelings here, and he takes his time in pushing her away. Willow then comes to him dressed up like Veruca, offering to have sex, but he declines, afraid she'll see the scratches from his previous night's adventures, and there's probably some guilt and shame in there. Oz then decides unilaterally that the only way to keep everyone safe is to lock Veruca in a cage with him, despite his group having ready access to a tranq gun, numerous crypts, and a slayer. Just before they turn, he also kisses her passionately, which again feels unlike Oz. Even if he has less control of his emotions, and feels something, it still doesn't feel like he would cheat on Willow, especially after her and Xander's tryst hurt him so much. Willow unsurprisingly walks in on them, and there is some great acting by Hannigan, displaying the sheer grief and pain that something like that causes. She calls out his hypocrisy, and when she asks him if he wanted Veruca more than he wanted her, his silence speaks volumes. Willow's immediate response, aside from overwhelming despair, is to turn to the black arts, to curse both of the people who hurt her. This will be a theme in the upcoming seasons, Willow not reacting well to trauma, and turning into some dark solutions. In the end though, she can't go through with it, this time, and Veruca turns up to murder her. Oz then shows up, kills Veruca, and is stopped unturned by Buffy. He then again decides unilaterally that he's leaving, despite him being the one in the wrong. Willow doesn't get a vote or even a response, he's just gone. The episode is overall frustrating because of some of the decisions necessary to make Oz leaving from the show make sense, and while there are some good individual moments, the overall feel is a letdown because of the main plot. The initiative is really good microcosm of the season as a whole. It's got a lot of good individual scenes, a fairly well laid out plot, but overall it just doesn't come together into a cohesive whole. The episode focuses on Riley, a previously minor character who was just a TA for Buffy's psychology class. Now we learn more about him, his friends, and his secret life as it's revealed he's one of the lead commandos for the Initiative, a covert government organization dedicated to cataloging demons. Despite Riley himself being incredibly milquetoast, this episode acts as a very good introduction to him, contrasting his farm boy awkwardness with the hardened soldier. He doesn't really talk like a real person, even someone in the wedding universe, but at this point it's acceptable, even a little endearing. It starts with him and his best friend, who's definitely not in love with him, Forrest, talking about girls. More specifically, Forrest is being incredibly gross and misogynistic, and Riley is trying to remain sort of neutral, all the while they're gazing at Buffy, commenting on her looks. We then cut to Spike, following up his capture from the last episode. His storyline is definitely the best part of the episode, with some decent sci-fi horror, with a stark white facility and menagerie of monsters. This design can be found again in Whedon's Cabin in the Woods, in pretty similar circumstances. It's amusing how immediately he blames his problems on Buffy, assuming she somehow got the funding for the advanced facility. His escape sequence is a little bit cheesy and highlights one of the biggest inconsistencies with him this season. It's soon revealed that Spike has a chip in his head that causes immense pain whenever he hurts a human, but there are multiple times this episode when he throws people around, grabs them aggressively, and otherwise does things that should send him writhing on the ground, but don't. It's not the biggest issue, but it feels like there were ways to have Spike escape that don't run into these problems. His scene with Harmony offers a bit of closure on their relationship, and shows his increasing obsession with Buffy. Also amusing is the pet name for Harmony diminishing to the point he calls her a pack of menthols. Speaking of Harm, she has an intense fight with Xander, showing the sheer physical prowess of those two peak specimens, or yet more slapstick, in a season that is getting more and more full of it. While Buffy has definitely had a lot of comedic moments, there is definitely a lot more physical comedy here than previous. I suppose it was just a different energy in the writer's room. Spike then shows another skill, breaking into some kind of office and finding Buffy's address on the computer. While he's hunting and pecking, it's definitely more in-depth than Angela's, isn't it? The initial scene with Willow is played straight, and is very reminiscent of his appearance in Lover's Walk. He's intimidating, and seems like he might actually kill Willow while she's at her lowest point. Willow is still dealing with the emotional fallout of Oz leaving, but is attending classes and in general continuing to exist. Riley asks for her to help courting Buffy, and after summarizing their torrid love affair, she does offer a few notable traits of Buffy's. This is another point in the episode's favor, the construction. When Riley knocks on her door, she yells at him to come in, and the same thing happens with Spike, which also circumvents the vampire restrictions. Although there's a chance the threshold wouldn't have been strong enough anyway. Spike's attack is most reminiscent of an SA scene, complete with loud music covering up the screams. Of course, the horror is immediately dissipated after the commercial break, when it's revealed that Spike has the chip, and his failure to perform is likened to erectile dysfunction. It's a weird contrast, to have the heavy drama immediately followed by completely deflating comedy, and here it just doesn't really work. The episode is almost at the end, however, so there's a confrontation between Buffy and the Initiative team, although circumstances contrive to have her hidden from Riley's view. This is caused by a flare gun, which is again set up well, continuing the trend of good payoffs this season. While all of this is happening, there is a sort of team-up between Xander and Giles, who are both lost. There's no real discussion of emotions, but it's clear from the dialogue there are a lot going unsaid between them. It's the same place they've been in for a few episodes, although developments are forthcoming soon. Riley's plot of the episode mostly revolves him thinking about Buffy, talking around her, realizing that he likes her, then bumbling all attempts to talk to her. It's adequate, though not particularly compelling, with a lot of awkward humor. Given that he's a TA in one of her classes, it's also a bit inappropriate, but that's hardly the biggest problem with her suitors. This episode offers some good information for the viewer, and furthers a few of the characters' storylines, while also setting up the building blocks for the main plot. That's definitely one of the pitfalls of Season 4. The big bad isn't even created until halfway through, and in the meantime there are only crumbs, ideas that might become something. Overall, it's a fairly decent episode, strong for the first half of Season 4, but a little bit disappointing. Pangs is one of Joss Whedon's favorite episodes of the show, which says quite a bit. It exemplifies all of Season 4's strengths and weaknesses, while coming up with its own unique problems, all wrapped up in a classic holiday bundle. I would consider it one of the bottom 5 episodes, largely due to the way it treats its issues. Despite this, there is the potential of an idea here, it's just executed very, very poorly. The premise is that Xander is working on a construction coup, part of his rotating set of jobs, and accidentally falls into an abandoned mission from the 19th century, unleashing the spirit of a Native American ghost whose tribe was abused there. The spirit curses him with a number of diseases including syphilis, and goes on a small rampage, killing the creator of a local museum and a priest knowledgeable about the local area, before turning his attention onto Buffy. The aim of the episode is to call attention to the hypocrisy of Thanksgiving, being built on the blood of Native Americans, but in the attempt it falls into many tired and problematic tropes. The first is there are no living Native Americans in the episode, only spirits, implying the tribe was destroyed in its ancient history. That is, however, not accurate, as the Chumash tribe depicted are real and are local to the Southern California area, with estimates of a few thousand around today. This all plays into the trope of the ancient Indian burial ground, which was well trodden by the late 90s. The second biggest problem is the genericness of the Native American spirit. They transform into various animals, speak in generic English, and in general are a basic stereotype with nothing specific to the Chumash tribe. It's also a shame to have him speaking English instead of subtitled Chumash, which have added a little bit of authenticity. This episode also aims to have conflict within the group, with Willow firmly on the side of the spirit, Giles on the side of the slang, and Buffy stuck in the middle. This grey morality just doesn't work, however, as the spirit isn't going around killing people that have wronged him or his tribe, but people with no connection to the events of the past. Buffy says she feels bad and hesitates, but ultimately they're just a ghost repeating their past pain, exacting vengeance on innocents. It's very similar to the ghosts in I Only Have Eyes for You, which Buffy would have definitely killed if she could have. Willow is particularly obnoxious here, in that while she accurately recollects the facts around Thanksgiving and the atrocities perpetuated by settlers against the native tribes, it doesn't have bearing to the current situation. If the curator of the museum was abusing sacred ground or digging up graves, things would be different, but she even says on the phone they'll have to halt construction. The central moral conflict just doesn't work. There are other things going on in this episode, however, including a giant stalkery cameo from Angel, on immediately after Buffy. It feels very cheesy, and his role in this episode is just bizarre. He shows up to help Buffy because he's received some vague warning, but there have a dozen other times this season where her life is in danger and he doesn't show up. There's nothing to make this incident special. He also insists that her friends don't mention him because it would make things too hard or something. Overall, it feels like a really cheesy appeal to fans without greater purpose. There's even Willow's line about Cordelia working for him, again advertising his show in a painful manner. The best bits are Spike still on the run from the initiative, retreating first to Harmony and then when she rightfully drives them off, to the Scooby Gang. He gets a few decent lines and we get a hint of his role for the remainder of the season. While there are a lot of bad points about the episode, there are a few good comedic moments, although, like most of the rest of the season, they're very slapstick. I don't know why they decided the college year was the time to go more goofy, but it's definitely very hit and miss. There are also some good moments with Anya, showing her increasing devotion to Xander, helping to build the relationship in a relatively organic way. But on the flip side, Willow is swapped entirely from mourning Oz to being single-mindedly devoted to the Native American cause, and while elements of this feel in character, as a whole the change is too drastic. Overall, the episode is on such a shaky base that even the few positive traits are outweighed by the sheer magnitude of mistakes, but at least it's relatively entertaining, like a car crash between two clown cars, where each moment has a little something to laugh about, then more in the sheer pain that's on display. Something Blue is yet another comedy-focused episode in Season 4, the fourth in the first 9. It certainly makes this season have a relatively unique tone, but not necessarily for the better. It's all about Willow and dealing with the fallout from Oz leaving. This makes the timing of Pangs even more suspect, as there is not even a reference to Oz in the last episode. However, retroactively making other episodes worse isn't the fault of this one, so it's best to take it as it is. Here Willow tries a number of different coping methods to deal with her feelings. Denial is the first, something that Spike sees through immediately, although the other Scoobies have a harder time. It's actually one of Spike's most consistent traits, his high emotional intelligence, perhaps a reference to his pre-vamp days as a poet. Next, Willow is simply depressed, crashing Buffy and Riley's picnic. Their relationship is still in an uncertain place, as it's clear they're both interested, but hesitant due to their monster-slaying obligations. There are some deeper cracks, however, but those won't really be addressed until next season, so for now they're content to have nice experiences together. Willow then opts to drown her sorrows in beer, which is treated pretty much the same as beer bad. Everything else failed, Willow turns to black magic, creating a spell that will make her will take place. Once again, Buffy's magic is incredibly powerful, with no real restrictions in place. While this spell is relatively uncontrollable, she is able to teleport people, mind control them, and in general cause an incredible amount of havoc. Much of the humor of the episode comes from these twisted genie wishes. The first is simply causing Giles to slowly become blind, although it's odd the effect is delayed, whereas all the other ones seem relatively instantaneous. Then she says that Spike and Buffy should get married, which they subsequently plan. It also involves them falling in love, which doesn't seem like part of the initial wish, but as it said before, Buffy magic is odd. This particular point seems like it was poking fun at the shipping community. It was intended to show that Spike and Buffy would never work together. Until Season 6 at least. About half the episode is devoted to them planning their wedding, and other characters being grossed out by their affections. Xander is then called a demon magnet, and is forced to fight a bunch of demons, which is a bit more straightforward. In the end, Willow is offered the role of a vengeance demon, just like Anya used to be, although she declines. Offrin, who we've seen previously, is surprisingly chill about this, which fits the comedy focus of the episode, and then everything is just made okay again. Overall, Something Blue is a fairly substandard Monster of the Week episode. The only interesting thing is the monster is Willow's magic on Rogue, rather than third party. it doesn't contribute hugely to the character arcs, aside from Willow now being over Oz, and generally is just a bit of a letdown. Next episode, however, is exactly the opposite, and arguably the best in the series. Hush is one of the best episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It has everything great about the show, including a memorable monster, good comedy, a focus on character interactions, and storyline progress. In many ways, it's the perfect episode, in that it gets basically nothing wrong. The Gentlemen, despite being one-off monsters, are one of the most iconic villains, and their presence dominates the episode. The inspirations for the design came from a few places. The first is, of course, fairy tales. They resemble ogres or demons that would appear in Grimm's original versions, and taking hearts is a very classical goal. Whedon claims that their design came from a nightmare he had when he was a child of a floating monster. When it came to making the monster, inspiration was taken from Hellraiser, Nosferatu, Mr. Burns, and Xenomorphs. Alien also had another reference, its tagline, "In space, no one can hear you scream." In addition, the gentlemen's outfits were inspired by Victorian England. They represented the upper class or patriarchy, with their straitjacket-wearing minions representing the lower class, those tossed in asylums or forced into labor. One of the more unique aspects about the Gentlemen is how each has a slightly unique design, with more square features or a more stretched face. This helps them stand out from one another, and implies some sort of fairy race or similar, not just a monster of one look. They're portrayed by Doug Jones, Camden Toy, Don W. Lewis, and Charles Brumble, all of whom were professional mimes, which helped add to the physicality of their silent performances. Where the episode really excels is something that very few others do: scope. While there had previously been attempts by Ethan Rayne to cause chaos, and Halloween and band candy, those felt minor compared to the events of this episode. The wider town is brought into Buffy's world, something they generally are very good at staying out of. Here, however, everyone has been quieted, and there are a wide range of responses. Stores are closed, but liquor stores are open. A priest stands at the head of a congregation, although everyone is forced to silently read along. There is a scalper, offering portable whiteboards at outrageous prices. Sociologist George Herbert Mead said the community consists of institutions like religion, economics, and language. When one of those fails or disappears, it's inevitable that the others will grow in to fill its place. There are more negative ideas that can take root, however, and a number are featured in this episode. Some people are shown to embrace despair, simply sitting on the ground or weeping. There are fights and other violence, although both Buffy and Riley step in to prevent outright chaos. All of this is ignoring the actual Gentlemen, it's merely a prelude to their arrival. There is a lot of good thematic work in the responses to them. At first, people band together, attempting to still meet and gather. A tired college student opens his dorm room in the middle of the night, assuming he can help in some way. This lets the Gentlemen in, who literally cut out his heart. The next night, when Tara is fleeing from them, frantically knocking on doors, people refuse to let her in, or offer help. Ultimately, Willow is there, but the masses are simply too scared. The Gentlemen in many ways represent evil at a societal level. In general, the institutions have never been on the side of the good guys in Buffy. The school principal, the police, the Watchers Council, the mayor, they all should have been in a position to help people, but pursued their own selfish needs instead. In Hush, the newscaster offers that the mass silence is caused by laryngitis, yet another cover-up. In the end, the evil of the Gentlemen can only be defeated by an individual's voice, in this case the scream of a warrior, someone who has fought their whole life to defeat evil and save the little guys. Bending that message to a political one, it can be seen as putting forward the power of an individual to make change and calling on the collective people to make a difference. The episode begins with a combination of classic scenes, a classroom with relevant discussion, and a dream sequence. After a brief introduction, Buffy and Riley are forced to kiss in front of the whole class. This is also their first kiss in the show, which shows how early on in their relationship that they are. Riley comments that kissing will make the sun go down, which is obviously a reference to her past relationship with Angel. This segues directly into a Nightmare on Elm Street inspired dream sequence, with a little girl chanting a nursery rhyme. It ends with a jump scare of the Gentleman, although we won't get a good shot of him until quite a bit later. Hush was written as a sort of challenge by Joss Whedon, who believed he was degenerating, with the show becoming very samey. Similar shots, story outlines, and dialogue. It was also an attempt to answer critics who said the dialogue was one of, if not the only element of Buffy that was good. The idea of doing an episode where everyone lost their voice was appealing because of this. The theme he was aiming for was that when people stop talking, they start communicating, and that language got in the way. After class is over, Buffy and Riley have a discussion about what they're doing over Christmas break. This results in them both lying to each other in order to keep their secret lives separate from their romantic. The theme of communication is repeated, something that occurs frequently throughout the show, and especially in this episode. It's very good with setup and to payoff, with most events that occur in the first act having some reaction in the third. The next scene features two relatively frayed relationships, with Spike and Giles and Anya and Xander. They both talk about difficulties they're having with communication, although Anya is certainly more blunt about it, saying that all Xander cares about is loss of orgasms. Xander is having issues with communicating his feelings about Anya, unable to express himself emotionally, whereas Anya is too verbal, saying private things in the public setting of Giles' apartment. Willow has moved on from her grief over Oz and has tried getting into a local Wicca group. Unfortunately for her, they're not actual witches, but just hippie types. They talk a lot about energy and shrines, but are ultimately twisting the words to fit their own ideas, which again plays into the theme of language. One of the girls also dismisses Willow's ideas completely, but adds no offense at the end to make it all okay, again exploring how words can be completely different from the intention. Tara is introduced in this scene as a very shy person learning to stand up for herself. In many ways, she took on the role that Willow previously had, as Willow has now become self-confident, and at ease with herself and her magical gifts. Tara acts as a damsel in distress, discovering her own power with the help of Willow. There are then parallel scenes with Buffy and Riley complaining to their respective best friends about being unable to tell the truth. Again, the thematic component rings strongly. The scene also ends with Riley using a voice command on the elevator, which will become relevant very soon. It's maybe 5 seconds, and no real attention is called to it, but it makes later problems feel more earned. Xander is forced to care for Spike while Giles has company, and their scene again continues these themes, with Spike adopting a mocking, sing-song version of Anya taunting Xander. The gentlemen then show up during the first night in a clock tower. It's a very solid villain lair, or terrible place, representing all that is bad and evil. The use of a clock is associated with time, but also death, as it reminds us that we only have a certain amount of hours in the day, and days in a life. The constant ticking is a sort of mocking laughter. Combined with the gentleman's final goal, to get 7 hearts, it acts as a sort of countdown. The first moments after the horses have been stolen is incredibly mundane, but it's also something rarely shown. Buffy gets up, goes to the bathroom, and brushes her teeth. The whole time there's no music, and the only sound is the Foley effects. As she gets back to her room, a girl runs past crying, but that's a fairly standard college experience. Only after Buffy tries to talk to Willow does the music kick in. Incidentally, the music in the episode is incredibly well done, and becomes instrumental in the episode after this point. The initial reactions are treated very comically. Xander blames Spike with exaggerated hand movements. Even the panic from characters feels cartoonish, and overly emphasized. Xander then decides to call Buffy and Willow, but of course neither character can talk. It's interesting how different this scene would be in another 10 years with texting and instant messaging, but in 2000, those were far from mainstream. There are perspectives from a number of different characters, including Riley in the Initiative House. This is another comedic moment, as they try to descend on the secret elevator, but without the voice command it deploys countermeasures. When they finally arrive, their leader points to the "use the stairs" and an emergency sign. It's also interesting that there are still some voices in Sunnydale, as the robotic voice of the elevator and a text-to-speech program are used, but because they're the only sources, it feels off. One of the most effective scenes at conveying the panic that people are feeling is when Tara heads down to a common room and the students are just milling about. They aren't rushing to class or trying to communicate, but they're still gathered in small groups, trying to stay safe in a population. The next scene takes a more societal look at this situation, depicting the various different reactions. It's impressive how many extras they had and how big the sets are. It feels like it's affecting everyone in the whole town. The group then watches a news broadcast that pins the whole thing on laryngitis, because magic doesn't exist despite all evidence to the contrary. Again, it's a robotic voice, something coming from technology. It also plays into the idea that the authorities are not only being unhelpful by denying the reality of the situation, but by quarantining the town, they're effectively shutting them off from help. There are parallels between the Scoobies and the Initiative, with both the old and the new wanting to have a presence in town to keep order. There's an immediate cut to a crashed car and boring water, with no one offering to help. Riley, however, is out in the community, breaking up fights, and after Buffy embraces him, they kiss for real, something they had both been blathering around in their previous interactions. Again, the theme of communication without language are present and key. The gentlemen then have their first reveal, as well as their weird henchmen. The strange creatures seem inspired by the lesser demons from the Hellraiser franchise, and their outfits are straitjackets, although it doesn't confine them at all. Their gaits are strangely loping or tumbling, like a demented circus clown. Due to the music and the grace of the gentlemen, at times it feels like a ballet. As for the main men themselves, it's hard to overstate how effective their appearance is. From their skeletal limbs, bald heads, and the way they float across the ground, it falls right into the uncanny valley, sending a single message to our brains. Run. One of the creepier things about them is their smiles. While they drift through the town, they carefully select where they're actually going, but in a way that seems utterly alien. They aren't searching for a specific door or a vulnerable person. Instead, they operate on some unknowable logic. Most monsters in Buffy are very bust down the door, fight and kill until they're stopped. The gentlemen are, as their name suggests, polite. They communicate to each other with small gestures, and when they finally find an appropriate victim, they softly knock on the door. This kill feels like it's another reference to A Nightmare on Elm Street, as the kid who opens the door with his shirt open is similar in appearance to the protagonist of the second film in that franchise. His ultimate fate is inspired by another nightmare of Joss Whedon, that of strange men floating at him while he lay unable to move on a bed. The point of view shot of the gentleman coming in is effective at conveying this image, and when he draws the scalpel out, there's a large amount of implied violence and blood, while showing very little of it. It cuts directly from that image to the heart, which allows the audience's mind to fill in the rest. The classroom scene is definitely the funniest in the episode, immediately following up a very serious dramatic scene with humor, as Season 4 is like to do. Giles has arranged an overhead presentation, something that is basically extinct in the modern era. This is amusing on its own, but he also brings a cassette player with Danse Macabre by St. John's. It's a fitting song, as it's about death appearing at Halloween and bringing forth the dead for a musical number. While Hush is not set on Halloween, it certainly evokes the holiday, and similarly the skeletal faces of the gentlemen evoke the classical Grim Reaper. Anya is munching away on popcorn, Willow and Buffy brought their whiteboards, and Xander is unprepared and clueless, which fits all of their characters. Alison Hannigan's acting in this scene is particularly good, miming a number of actions well. Buffy's miming of staking is also of note, in that no one, not even Giles, gets it initially. She also gets offended at Giles' caricature of her, in a joke that was initially pitched by Sarah Michelle Gellar. In another example of good setups, we see Tara looking up the room number for Willow with a very clear 214 displayed. Funnily enough, Spike used the same technique only a few episodes previously, although his intentions were slightly less noble. Tara offers the archetype of the young girl traveling through the woods, even stumbling just before the gentlemen reach her. She runs through the halls knocking on doors, but no one opens them, as they're too afraid, continuing the earlier themes. She begins to bang on a door, but a careful viewer will note it's 219, and one of the gentlemen opens it up, holding a juicy human heart. Willow finally comes out of her room to the noise and bumps into Tara before they both flee. In some parallel action, Riley and Buffy end up investigating the clock tower at about the same time, and both have to fight off some minions. Then they finally collide, and in a John Woo-inspired moment they level their weapons at each other, have a stare down, then turn around and continue fighting the bad guys. Interestingly, the big action set piece is broken up with a brief scene at Giles' apartment, where through misunderstanding it seems like Spike is fed on Anya, and Xander is able to come in and save the day. This is the conclusion to their small arc from the beginning of the episode, where he demonstrates his care for her with violence. Anya responds with a gesture that had almost had to be cut from the show, and they live happily ever after. In the meantime, Willow and Tara are fleeing for their lives, and then they combine bodies in order to move a large obstacle with magic. This was a first hint at their future relationship, and is a fairly effective scene, and helps show some of the themes of the show like the power of love. The episode is almost at its end, and there is more fighting at the clock tower, until finally Riley is above the MacGuffin of the episode, a box that has stolen everyone's voices. In another solid comic bit, there is a slow-mo shot of him crushing a glass jar, then offering a great smile. He then realizes his mistake and smashes the actual box. Buffy screams, and like any fairy tale, it just sort of ends. The next day, everything's returned to normal, with a wide shot of the college campus including a bunch of extras. Just like many Buffy episodes, the supernatural elements are dismissed by the general public, and life goes on. There are a few nice scenes with Tara and Willow, Giles and Olivia, and finally Riley and Buffy. It's definitely the perfect scene to end the episode on. Riley comes in and tells Buffy what they have to talk, and then silence. When language comes back into the mix, communication went out, and with neither wanting to have the difficult conversation that's ahead of them about the lies they've both told, and the secret world that ties them together, even though it's been keeping them apart. The next episode begins exactly where this one ends, but for now there's no resolution. Hush is an incredible episode of television that managed to convey some relatively heavy themes in a way that still fit the Buffy world, and is a great mix of horror, comedy, and drama. Despite being a one-off villain, good progress was made on multiple characters, including the introduction of Tara, who will go on to be a member of the main cast. The Gentlemen have become one of the most iconic villains of genre TV, and certainly created their own brand of nightmares. Overall, it's just about perfect. Doomed is an excellent episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer that gets let down by its last few minutes. It helps push along a number of major storylines, and manages to balance the three main characters well, with a plot that is well trodden but also well executed. It begins right where the last episode left off, with Riley and Buffy unable to speak to each other, having collectively discovered the other is a supernatural combatant. Riley ends up breaking the silence first, after getting up and pacing uncomfortably. He begins with a fairly rude question of "What are you?" It's somewhat ironic that question is something Buffy deals with on a number of different occasions internally. She is a Slayer, but what exactly does that mean? A number of different episodes focus on this, although the one which is most prominent is next season's intervention. Of course, being asked that in this case merely causes Buffy to snark, avoiding the difficult conversation. Both parties have lied to each other about a significant part of their lives, but the reactions couldn't be more different. Riley is inquisitive and seemingly turned on by the idea that they can fight monsters together, whereas Buffy wants a relationship separate from her work. Riley lying brings back memories of all of her struggles with Angel, and how intertwined their lives were, and how complicated that was. What Buffy wanted out of her relationship was for someone to love her, and have an escape, a release from the life and death struggles that she put up with every day. In the end, she doesn't really love Riley, but she appreciates his company and likes being with him, although sometimes that's not enough. As the title of the episode indicates, however, their relationship was doomed from the start because it was founded on lies. Even once those are revealed, Riley is still unable to tell her everything, and regardless, them being together and fighting monsters simply doesn't work. Their conversation ends, and then there is an earthquake. As Giles says, not an uncommon occurrence in Southern California, but the last time one happened, the Master rose and Buffy died. Not for long, but it's still an event that sticks with you. Bringing that back 3 seasons later helps with the thematic components of the episode, as it's a reminder of the peril that Buffy has to deal with every day. We then cut to Spike and Xander and establish that their dynamic has continued, with Xander still feeling somewhat lost in life and Spike being depressed. This ultimately culminates with Spike trying to stake himself, in a scene that is both amusing and tragic. It also forces Spike to stay with the group at the end, and this is a good plot reason for him sticking around, whereas otherwise he is just a hindrance. Meanwhile, at the military base, Riley has to ask about what a Slayer is from Forrest, who is clearly in love with Riley, being affronted at the mention of Buffy. We also see Riley in action, helping to wrangle a demon, which helps demonstrate his competency after he's taken a few beatings in the last few episodes. Willow's small arc this episode begins at a party, in response to the earthquake. She sees Percy, which is another nice callback. The episode is partially about moving on from the past, while acknowledging the events that led up to the future. Percy calls Willow a nerd to the girl he's dating, and Willow retreats rather than confront him. Of course she lives in Sunnydale, so when she does so she encounters a bloody body richly scarred. Police arrive and everyone goes into investigation mode. It's also notable that Willow is more annoyed by the nerd comment than the fatality, but this represents what early adolescence is about, where personal insults or problems are a bigger deal than tragedies or the apocalypse. Buffy was once again right about this, as it is the end of the world, with a sect of demons out collecting MacGuffins. This is maybe the 6th or 7th apocalypse the group have encountered, so it's somewhat of an old hat. Buffy remembers the sigil on the dead man from her nightly excursions in the cemetery, and confronts a demon there. More importantly though, she confronts Riley, who insists they try to work things out. He doesn't take no for an answer, but eventually Buffy leaves. There are then parallel sequences between the Initiative and the Scooby Gang, similar to last episode, but with more talking. It also shows the difference in experience, as the government has provided all the same information, but comes to the wrong conclusion. Riley and Buffy have another fight, this time on the streets of Sunnydale. He negs her, calling her stupid and self-involved, and is quite upset that she won't just give him a chance. He also calls fighting for the Initiative fun and exciting, which is about the worst thing to say to Buffy, who cannot escape from her destiny, whereas Riley is doing it as a hobby. Again, Buffy rejects him, and Riley doesn't accept it. Spike, Xander, and Willow are on their own little adventure, and he does a rundown of their lives, reinforcing the earlier scene with Percy, saying they haven't changed. This isn't true, but it's easy to get in that reductive mindset, and both characters are still trying to find their identity. That will come soon, with Willow coming out of the closet, and Xander becoming closer to Anya, but for now they have to return to their old high school, all charred and exploded, to go to the Hellmouth. Amusingly, Giles gets knocked out yet again, and it turns out that he had the MacGuffin the entire time, picking it up at an estate sale. This is not the first time that's happened, and it's a great running gag that he has deadly and ancient artifacts just lying around. It also makes sense that he eventually buys the magic box to house all the arcane junk. After they go back to school, they fight the demons, but it looks like they've lost when Riley arrives, and ignoring physics, Buffy grabs onto his little rope thingy and saves the day. Riley then fails miserably about explaining his presence to the gang, while Spike puts on a terrible American accent. This scene is a little bit cringy, but fits with Riley's overall personality. The real problem is in the next scene, when Buffy heads to Riley's room and decides that everything he had said managed to convince her to try a relationship. I understand there are limited episodes, and they only recently got together for the first time, but given everything they've said in this episode, and Buffy's history, it doesn't make sense she would forgive him so quickly. Thematically, it's alright, as the episode is about moving on from the past with the earthquakes, the nerd comment, and Spike's newfound desire to fight demons, but it's just not believable. especially as their last serious conversation had Riley insulting Buffy. Most of the episode is so good, it's just a shame that right at the end it goes back to the standard sitcom bits, where the relationship is fixed immediately instead of letting the characters have time to heal. A New Man is one of the rare Giles-focused episodes of the series. They generally come about once a season, and this one is up there with the best. Like much of Season 4, it's a comedy-focused episode, with much of the humor coming from the main plot, Giles being transformed into a demon. Beyond that, it's about relationships that get left behind when life changes. In this case, Giles has less and less reason to hang out with the rest of the group. Buffy and Willow go to college together, and Xander's their non-university friend. But he's the librarian without a library. The big issue that occurs in this episode is him being left out of the information that Riley is with the Initiative. Given he's been trying to understand their motives and discover their members for months, this is obviously frustrating, and that emotion carries over to when Ethan Rayne comes back to town, which is always a fun time. The episode begins with a surprise birthday party, somewhat similar to the one in Season 2, where Oz is introduced to the world of the supernatural. The focus is not on Buffy's reaction, however, but Giles. First he is dismissed by Anya, who Xander reprimands, which shows how their relationship is going, briefly. Then Willow comes and reminds him how many people he doesn't know, and finally Buffy comes and introduces Riley as her boyfriend, though not as her partner in supernatural crime fighting. Buffy's final slide is not intentional, but is probably the most harmful. She refers to Professor Walsh's words of advice, effectively telling Giles she has moved on from him as an authority figure. While Giles was trying to push this narrative back in episode 1, it's clear that he wasn't ready to move on like that. He decides to meet with Walsh, sizing her up in person. This does not go well, as she is dismissive of him, and goes so far as to say Buffy has had a lack of male figures in her life. While Buffy's father leaving certainly had some impact on her, it's unfair to say that Giles did not take over that role, and loves her like a daughter. This scene is particularly sad to watch, as we've seen Giles struggle with his own issues and hers, but he always stood by Buffy. Since the focus of this episode is on beating up Giles, next his research demons turn out to be a phony, and then Willow and Xander reveal they know about the Initiative, and he's accidentally been left out. Giles then asks him to leave him alone, and an amusing scene catches Ethan Rayne in the middle of monologuing. While this would be silly coming from almost any other villain, Ethan has always shown a flair for the dramatic. Then, instead of just fighting each other, the two old friends go drinking. Ethan reveals the demonic world is getting upset about something, the Initiative, and especially 314, a mystery that will be revealed within the next few episodes. Things take a lighter turn as the drinks keep going, and Giles says he's an unemployed librarian with a tendency to get knocked on the head, which is a fair assessment. In the meantime, there are a couple of nice scenes with Buffy and Riley and Tara and Willow. Neither offers much new information, but build their respective relationships a little bit. Of course, after a night of hanging out, Ethan couldn't resist a little bit of mischief, so turns Giles into a Viaral demon, and he has to go on a buddy cop adventure with Spike, who speaks Viaral. They have a few encounters, including Giles running behind Professor Walsh and frightening her in an amusing bit, and eventually they find Ethan in a seedy hotel room. In previous episodes, he's been trying to cause chaos all throughout the town or save his own skin, so it's not entirely clear what his greater plan was here. Maybe it was just having a bit of fun, delivering a bit of chaos before the government cracked down. This is actually his last appearance on the show, and though he was in a few issues of the Season 8 comic, it's his last major role in the franchise, so maybe it doesn't really matter. Either way, Buffy is about to kill Giles in his demon form, but recognizes the eyes. Then they're able to fix the curse. They reunite, talk about having better communication, and in general fix things up. There's a side plot in the episode involving Buffy dealing with the Initiative, setting up a conflict where she doesn't listen to orders and prefers her own instincts. This has played out before in her interactions with the Watchers Council, so it's well-trodden ground, but it will come up very soon. The episode has some decent thematic work going on with Giles' role in the series, and a few nice scenes developing other relationships. It also hints about the future big bad of the series, although that's still moving relatively slowly. For a Monster of the Week episode, it's above average, although it's a shame this is Ethan's last appearance, disappeared by the US government. The IN Team is a hugely significant episode to the overall plot of Season 4, while still spending a good amount of time on the character relationships, even exploring some completely new angles. Despite this, it struggles in a few key areas that make it ultimately unsatisfying. It begins with a pair of contrasting scenes. Willow and Xander are teaching Anya to play poker, but commenting about the lack of Buffy, as she's been distracted with both Riley and the Initiative. Xander surprisingly is the voice of reason, noting that there are a lot of unanswered questions about the group, and Buffy has dived a whole hog into joining up with them. That in turn highlights one of the larger problems this episode, and these last few episodes. Buffy is naturally anti-authority. We've seen it with the Watchers Council, with her stint as Anne, and in general, whenever a monster of the week tries to take control, she reacts with extreme violence. In the last episode, she discussed being a slayer openly with Professor Walsh, which was borderline, but could be seen as showing her respect for the woman as a teacher, similar to her relationship with Giles. This episode, however, after dismantling the team that was trying to track her, which she does effectively effortlessly, she is invited to join them, even going on a mission within the first day. This feels strange not only from her perspective, as joining the military is so contrary to her personality, but also from theirs. She is still an unknown. This is commented on by one of the scientists. The existence of the Slayer was thought to be a myth until Buffy showed up and kicked ass. A secret government organization like this one would have many levels of bureaucracy, and inviting an untrained woman to join with them immediately feels off, and makes it seem like they are making things up as they go along. This episode continues with that, making them seem almost completely incompetent. While previously they had been foiled by Buffy and Spike, they had at least captured demons and showed a degree of strength. Here they get easily beaten by Buffy, some of their agents get beaten up by Spike who can't harm humans, and they can't track him down for hours. Similarly, when Professor Walsh decides Buffy is a liability, she arranges for an ambush, with the expectation that the Slayer will be killed by 2 random demons, due to a faulty weapon. It's such a shoddily executed plan, that it even undermines the character. Even just having another couple of demons would make it more of a threat, but 2 is barely a workout. Back to the episode, the themes of separation between the group are hammered home in the next few scenes. Willow and Buffy have a conversation where she promises to meet up with the gang at the Bronze and have fun just like the good old days. When the time arrives, she brings all her new initiative buddies and is an hour late. Willow of course responds with some passive aggression before bringing up the group's collective doubts. They're ignored, and Buffy rushes off to work for the initiative. Despite the problems with this storyline, the scene of them tracking and fighting a demon is well executed. It includes Forrest pining for Riley's love, commenting about Buffy taking over his position as second in command, even including the line, "and he picks a girl." While this could be some garden variety sexism, it seems clear the attitude is an attempt to hide his true feelings. Buffy and Riley's team fight the demon and fight it. The scene is overlaid with them having sex for the first time, calling back to what Faith said about slaying, as well as Riley's earlier comments about getting excited about the job. The soundtrack also pulls a lot of weight here, with a sort of odd techno or synth track, indicating the contrast between the emotional romantic act and the cold scientific approach of the initiative. After, it cuts to Professor Walsh watching them, as there are cameras not only all over the initiative, but also in the fraternity above. While this is creepy, it also hints at an aspect of Walsh's relationship with Riley that has not been mentioned before, that of lust. While she mentions concerns about Buffy before, it's this final act of having sex with her man that pushes her over the edge to violence. In addition to the general oddness of the relationship, there are maternal aspects as well, creating some Oedipal elements. She makes sure Riley has his vitamins, refers to him by his first name rather than just Agent Finn, and displays a level of closeness that crosses the line. Buffy wakes up in bed with red sheets for the 3rd time, but this time the man is still there. Riley offers a goofy smile, and then takes his vitamins based on an alarm, which sets up a future storyline, where it's revealed all the initiative have been unknowingly drugged with steroids. Buffy returns to her room to find Willow also having been gone for the night. Her storyline in this episode is getting closer to Tara, casting spells late into the night. While it's still subtext, the romantic hints are growing, and will soon manifest. The scene also highlights how Buffy and Willow have grown apart, as at the beginning of the season they were eager to share details of their love lives. Now they're both going about their own lives, and harboring secrets. Walsh's ambush of Buffy seems to succeed, as her little tracking thing said Buffy was dead. With no further confirmation, she brings Riley back and tells him about Buffy's fate. Note that her whole combat encounter took likely under a minute, which makes the timing of everything feel odd, as Buffy pops up in the camera feed and reveals she survived, outing Walsh's actions to Riley. He walks away from her, abandoning the initiative. This could be an interesting plotline, with the Scoobies having insider information but the initiative being well funded, and we could further explore the dynamics between Walsh and Riley. However, all of that comes to an end when Adam, a Frankenstein's monster made with state-of-the-art science, is revived and immediately kills Walsh, proclaiming her to be his mother. It's a sudden moment, but ultimately the surprise becomes disappointment, as all the missed opportunities for the season become manifest, and now it's a relatively generic bad guy as the big bad. This coming off the heels of the Mayor, Angelus, and Spike, who all had unique emotional elements and were the best parts of their respective seasons. Adam is fine for a few episodes, but is ultimately just not that interesting. It's unfortunate that's how the episode ends, as there were some well-executed scenes and good character moments all throughout. The second act twist is standard for Buffy seasons, but this one just doesn't end up working out. Goodbye, Iowa is a great title for an episode that properly introduces the big bad for the season, Adam. While he killed Walsh at the end of the last episode, this is when we see his physical prowess, as well as his motivations. This is also arguably the best, or at least most interesting, Riley is in the entire series, which offers points. The other characters suffer a little bit, as this is a plot-heavy episode, but they all get in a moment or two. It begins with Buffy revealing Walsh's plot to the rest of the gang. They react suitably, without too much "I told you so." They also bring up the idea that with an organization like the Initiative after them, they're all in real danger, in more ways than one. It's one thing to be in the middle of combat, or attacked by vampires in a one-off, but they're driven out of their collective homes and eventually decide to live in a dank hole, Xander's basement. As a brief aside, this is the 11th episode in a row without Buffy fighting or dusting any vampires. The name is really feeling like a legacy title at this point. It also feels like this is where some of the discord with Season 4 comes in. It leaves behind not only the familiar locations of the high school, but also the classical antagonists, replacing them with generic demons and soldiers. Even when Buffy was dealing with big world-ending threats, she would still patrol, and many cold opens involved waiting for vamps. That's seemingly been forgotten for some time. In a classic bit of comic timing, the second Giles says his apartment might be safe, Riley busts down the door and has a heart-to-heart with Buffy. While he's busy denying Walsh's actions, he spots Spike sitting in the corner. Spike attempts a bad American accent again, then gives up, admitting he's their hostile 17. Incidentally, James Marsters is actually American, so there are a couple layers to his bad accent. This starts off a chain reaction for Riley, who is unable to rectify Buffy working with someone he views as evil. Buffy exists in a world of greys. This was less prevalent in the first season, but as the show progressed, there are more ambiguous situations and fewer pure evil baddies. Early on, we're told all vampires are evil, and they're nothing like the person they were before they were bit. Both of these are proven false by the third season. The Watchers Council was a force for good, until they poisoned Buffy and refused to help Angel. Faith exists entirely in the midpoints of morality. Riley, on the other hand, comes from a small town in Iowa. He was brought up to believe in good and evil and following orders. He started with the military, then the Initiative, and was always told not to question things, to simply know that he was in the right, and the things he fought were in the wrong. Previously, Walsh was good, and Buffy was good. Them being at odds disrupts his worldview. In the meantime, we have Adam's first proper scene, after he escapes from the Initiative with no resistance. It seems like it should be difficult, being a giant monster in a secret facility, but their incompetence is already thoroughly proven. Adam encounters a little boy playing with an action figure, and the boy calls him a monster. Adam is, of course, an interpretation of Frankenstein's monster, being a man made out of pieces, stitched together with science. Just like in the Universal film, his first encounter with a child leads to tragedy, although the intent is different. The monster merely believed himself to be playing a game, whereas Adam dissects the boy in an attempt to understand how he works. The question is whether it's an immoral or amoral act. Does Adam understand that killing is wrong, but continues to do so in the pursuit of knowledge, or is he more like a child, flailing unknowingly? Based on his future actions, the first conclusion seems correct, that he understands human morality, but disagrees on some fundamental level. One of the key thematic differences between the two stories is the creator. In Frankenstein, it is the titular character, a mad male doctor who decides to create life all by himself. The idea of male pregnancy is surprisingly common in horror, although it tends to involve more bodily destruction than scientific experiments. In Buffy, however, it is Walsh's creation, who calls her mother and wishes to please her, even posthumously. While we know very little about her background, we do know that she viewed Riley as her child as well as Adam. It seems like she had no biological children, so used what was available to her to create a family. At the end of this season, it is Buffy's connections to her friends, her loved ones, that allow her to triumph over Adam, and it seems like his inability to form these relationships that allows her to succeed. The Scoobies are then shown in Xander's basement watching cartoons, doing their best to stay hidden. Here we have a comedic moment from Anya that is paid off well. She tells Buffy that she needs to find a nice, stable man like Xander, but he is taken. She reinforces that last point, that Buffy can't have Xander. Later on, Buffy invites Xander with her to infiltrate the Initiative, and Anya interjects, saying that taking him on a dangerous mission is tantamount to taking him. This again shows how much Anya cares about him. It also contrasts his feelings, as in the very next scene he twice in a row jokes about having sex with Riley, then kissing Buffy. One side is more committed to the relationship than the other, and while this doesn't have any impact now, a few seasons down the line the cracks shown here to start to deepen. Another relationship is also starting to grow as Willow heads to Tara's apartment and they do a spell together. This time it's a demon finding one, but Tara intentionally disrupts it. This can be read in one of two ways. The initial assumption is that she wanted to spend more time with Willow, so through the attempt to keep trying. This makes sense, but the second explanation feels more in line with Tara as a character. Next season, in Family, we learn that Tara has an abusive upbringing, with male figures who have convinced her that she is a demon, and when she turns 20 she needs to return to the homestead to be subjugated. Those in similar oppressive environments often internalize negative attributes, even those provably false, so her failing the spell could be foreshadowing that aspect of her backstory, and that she didn't want to be outed as a demon to Willow. While they're searching for answers with magic, Buffy opts for the old-fashioned approach of beating Willie the Snitch in the demon bar. Unfortunately, Riley follows her, and discovers her cavorting with what he views as bad guys again. He sarcastically claims that Willie harboring demon makes him a good guy like Buffy, then he grabs her and throws her around. It's clear at this point that something has gone wrong, as he is shaking and has shadows around his eyes. Buffy tries to calm him, but as what appears to be an old woman gets up and tries to leave, he pulls a gun on her, like your average American police officer. This is definitely Mark Blucas's best performance of the season, showing a man that has had everything he thought was concrete torn out underneath him. Being a withdrawal from his supersteroid certainly doesn't help things. When Buffy brings him back home, she certainly gets a flashback of Angel, as he says, "Maybe he's the bad guy, and the thing that you should kill," which certainly echoes amends from last season. Similarly, she pats his head and comforts him like a mother, just like she did for Angel after he returned from hell. Again, just like Angel, she puts herself in great danger to find an answer to what's afflicting him, as was the case with the poison from Faith's arrow. Her infiltration of the initiative actually goes off without a hitch somehow, finding her way into the records room after overhearing convenient conversation about how the government was drugging the soldiers to keep them compliant and strong. After doing some classic intimidation, she leaves a great line open with, "What was in 314? As Adam has a flair for the dramatic, he drops the corpse and he proclaims, "Me." His subsequent monologue is lessened somewhat in its effectiveness by the floppy disks that he inserts into his chest, but it establishes him as an intelligent threat with all the knowledge of the initiative. He then dismantles Riley and Buffy in combat, before doing a bit of stabbing and leaving through a vent. Ultimately, Adam ends up being a lackluster big bad, but this introduction is pretty solid. The episode builds him up well enough, and the payoff works, while uncovering some secrets of the initiative. It's certainly not as impactful as Innocence or Consequences, but the potential for payoff is there. It still requires great execution, however, and as we'll see in the next few episodes, it doesn't quite get there. Faith is a mirror image of Buffy, a possibility if circumstances were different, so by examining her character in depth, we also see elements of what it means to be a Slayer. Faith was one of the better parts of last season, and that remains true here, with a pair of episodes that are the third best in the season, after Hush and Restless. It's certainly telling that by pushing the main plot of the season to the back burner, the quality goes up. The episode begins with a dream sequence, very similar to Buffy's from last season, but from Faith's perspective. Slayers always have prophetic dreams, and this continues that trend. The pair discuss the coming of Buffy's little sister, who will arrive in the premiere of next season. It's then revealed that Buffy stabbed Faith with her own dagger, which becomes a recurring theme in all of Faith's dreams. It's as the old saying goes, no one is the villain in their own story. In Faith's world, Buffy is an emotionless monster, a Terminator, whose sole job is to find and kill her. There is a rule of threes with dreams, and Faith's second dream highlights her relationship with the mayor. Here she's innocent and wears pastel colors. They chat about the weather, and he casually removes a snake from their blanket, a reference to his demon form. Buffy then shows up and slits his throat, before coming after Faith, just as she defeated the mayor at the school. In the final dream, Faith is running from the Buffy in a cemetery they have both patrolled so frequently. Faith trips and falls into a grave, and Buffy jumps in after. They have an off-screen fight, and Faith emerges victorious, dragging herself out of the grave in a spout of torrential rain and a shot that references the Shawshank Redemption. It also seems like foreshadowing for Buffy's similar journey at the beginning of Season 6. She then wakes up, having conquered her dream Buffy. This all occurs about a third of the way through the episode, but there are a few important scenes in the meantime. We see the Scoobies still in Xander's basement, planning their next move. Willow's outfit is very unique here, although the shirt she wears later might have it beat. Buffy wants to stage a frontal assault in order to get Riley out, but he pulls rank and walks out on his own 2 feet. There's also a gnarly scene in the woods, while Buffy is searching for evidence of Adam. Generally, the effects on Buffy range from acceptable if a bit cheesy to bad, but this is one that is truly creepy, as the vivisected demon is tied to a tree, its flayed skin a deep red, while its insides are a sickly yellow. We get a decent close-up of it as well, and it's fairly surprising they got away with that level of violence. Faith's first real act upon waking up is to commit her own bit, knocking someone unconscious and taking her clothes. Because of this, various characters including Buffy and Willow refer to her as psychotic, but that's a far cry from the truth. Psychopathy is defined by a lack of empathy or remorse. Certainly, part of the mask that Faith puts up is that she doesn't care, that when she killed the mayor's assistant it was no big deal, but her actions reveal the opposite. Both Buffy and Faith were traumatized by that event. However, Buffy is able to deal with it using healthy coping mechanisms. First, she shares it with Willow, and they have a long talk about it. She then goes to an authority figure in Giles, and although Faith beats her there, the point is that she had support systems in place to help her understand what happened, and to learn and grow. Faith, on the other hand, is defined by what's lacking, both friends and family. She feels the pain too deeply, and the only option becomes complete repression, shutting it down so she can function. The violence that Faith undertakes is not random or to cause undue pain. There is always a goal in mind, a reason behind what she does, and while she certainly harms innocents in that path, it's a side effect rather than a goal. There's a nice bit of narration that occurs while Faith is leaving the hospital, arms folded in a defensive position. Buffy says, "You know, I never stopped thinking about you." She's talking to Riley after his brief stint in the hospital, but it also applies to Faith, both in her views on Buffy and the mayor. Her life was put on hold, so she didn't get over the trauma that happened to her. This episode is definitely slower paced than some others, and part of that was after they finished filming, they realized they were 8 minutes short, so went back and wrote some small scenes for Faith to do. That's why she spends about 10 minutes walking around Sunnydale. This works well in showing her mental state, however, how lost and confused she is, and it helps explain her violent actions later. Buffy displays a lot of empathy when she initially learns about Faith escaping, as well as some false hope that she doesn't remember what happened. This is such a contrast from Sanctuary, the Angel episode that offers the end of this arc. Buffy also has to explain who Faith is to Riley, and she mentions editing out some of the Angel parts, which is another reason her relationship with Riley doesn't work. She wants a nice, easy boyfriend, but refuses to tell him the whole truth. Willow chides her about it, and Buffy says that it's too long of a story to tell. Riley later mentions he's aware of her lying to him, but just moved past it. Buffy lies to him again, and it's clear they're simply on very different emotional levels. Faith, on the other hand, has no need for lies or hiding, and shows up in broad daylight. There's a very well done and tense scene where the pair of Slayers bounce off each other, and violence seems just on the cusp of exploding. The cops arrive, and after a few blows, Faith flees. Next is a scene dealing with the various characters' reactions to Faith being back. This includes the revelation that the nurse watching over her was working for the Watchers Council. We haven't seen anything from them since Buffy quit, so it's actually a nice surprise to see them again. While Faith is walking down dark alleys, she's accosted by a demon who comes bearing presents. Among them is a tape from the mayor, which is a fun and welcome surprise. It's a reminder of just how great an actor he is, which really highlights the difference between big bads. Adam just can't cut it. His performance even makes Faith smile, and I believe it's the only genuine one in the whole 4 episodes. This tape does highlight some important things. The first is that while the mayor did care for Faith and treat her like a daughter, their relationship was still transactional. Instead of offering her some hope or a positive path to progress forward, he insists that her days are numbered, that without him to protect her, she is alone and vulnerable. He even says that even though Faith's life is over, she can go out with a bang. It's contributing to her path of destruction rather than trying to provide a proper life. In an act of revenge against Buffy, he provides her with a device that allows her to swap bodies. She decides to put it to immediate use while confronting Buffy, but first she sets a trap. Perhaps inspired by seeing the mayor again, she goes to Buffy's parental figure, her mom. This is actually her first appearance since the premiere of the season, as Buffy has moved on. Faith comments the same thing, bringing up a stack of mail to be picked up, and drawing connections between both of them being forgotten. Of course, that's a matter of perspective, as Joyce recognizes that Buffy has grown up, and her role will naturally be reduced. Faith, on the other hand, never got that chance, and feels stuck in Buffy's shadow forever. It's clear that Faith still has feelings for Buffy, and she decries how Buffy is a new boy toy, and has moved on from her. Buffy always has impeccable timing though, and manages to leap through a second-story window and tackle Faith, just as she was about to start stabbing. They have a particularly destructive fight, smashing glasses, tables, and doors, but in the end it seems like Buffy is going to win. Before Faith pulls out the trump card and swaps bodies, the cops arrive, Buffy and Faith's body is knocked out, and Faith and Buffy's body proclaims she's 5x5. It's a great episode, although it's more setup than payoff, and that all comes in Who Are You? Even in this first scene, we see the nuanced performance, with Faith talking to Joyce. For the purposes of this review, things can get a bit confusing when body swaps happen. So, for the remainder of this, we'll discuss who the character is, not what body they're in. Faith doesn't do a particularly convincing job, but there was no indication of magic, so Joyce just considers it a result of the fight. Faith makes an off-color prison rape joke, but it fits with the character, and it's not meant to be funny. While Faith hides it well enough, it's clear she's hurt when Joyce refers to her as a raving psychotic. It was about a year ago that she was being invited to Christmas dinner, and there was an attempt at a relationship. Now she's been put into the same category of monster as the things that Buffy fights. The next scene involves Faith exploring her new body. The trope of body swaps is fairly common in fantasy and sci-fi shows, but rarely do they get into the implications. It's inherently a violation of self. Faith has literally taken Buffy's body and claimed it for her own. Her scene in the bath demonstrates this totally, lovingly caressing her new parts. This also comes back to Faith's desire for Buffy last season, where now she can finally do whatever she wants. She then practices her impression of Buffy in the mirror, outlining a few key traits. That she's uptight, helps people, and is highly moral. The scene ends with her saying, "I'm going to kill you," to the theoretical villain. This shows Faith's belief that ultimately she and Buffy are both killers, that it's their lot in life. Death is their gift, a phrase that will recur frequently next season. Although the episode is focused on Faith, there is still development for Willow and Tara's relationship. Willow has sequestered Tara away, not telling her friends about their spells, even lying about where she's been. Tara is meek and accepting of this, but finally stands up for herself, bringing up that she is an invisible presence in Willow's life. Willow says that having her all to herself makes her special, but more than that, she's not ready to come out to her friends. Willow still has a few episodes to go before she's willing to admit to herself that she's gay. While they're finally taking another step, Faith is trying to flee, booking the first flight out of Sunnydale. Before that, however, she decides to have some fun in Buffy's life. She heads to a meeting of the Scoobies, where they declare resounding success in capturing Faith. And then Giles reveals that it's not the police that have her, but the Council's special task force. There have been hints before that the Council's morally grey activities, but this is the first time we see them. In a couple of episodes, they've transitioned from merely kidnapping to firing assault rifles at Buffy and other innocents, showing how little regard they have for her. While discussing affairs with the Scoobies, Faith imagines stabbing Willow, which shows both her personal dislike, but also reveals something deeper. She has a similar daydream about attacking Angel after he shelters her, which points to a pattern. She doesn't act on these violent impulses, but clearly deals with them frequently. These kind of thoughts often occur in those with trauma, although more often they imagine committing violence against themselves. Faith displays so many traits of a deeply traumatized young woman who never received the help she needed. Faith promises to go patrolling, but instead heads to the Bronze, dancing wildly, enjoying Buffy's body to its fullest. While there she encounters Spike, and has one of the most iconic scenes of the episode, where she seduces him, telling him exactly what she could do to him, and then walking away claiming that it's wrong. While Spike certainly had an obsession with Buffy before, it does seem like this is a turning point, transitioning it to sexual desire. Willow and Tara also head to the Bronze, where they accidentally bump into Faith. This wasn't a planned meeting, but Willow at least steps forward and introduces them. Faith recognizes the longing glances that Tara gives Willow, and somewhat crudely says that Willow is no longer driving stick. She's then cruel to Tara, talking about Willow's relationship to Oz. Tara is a witch though, so instead of a traditional sitcom plot, she immediately understands there is something wrong, and they figure out the body switching spell. There still has to be a little bit of progress in the main plot for the season, so Adam gets himself a cabal of vampires, their first appearance in the show in about forever. While his sermon to them is a bit lacking, he brings up a good point. The vampires are arguably more obsessed with avoiding death than humans, because theoretically they live eternally, whereas humans have an expiry date. Faith then commits her worst act in Buffy's body upon realizing that Riley is expecting her. First she tries very overt seduction, the same kind she used on Spike. Riley, however, is not into it, more confused than turned on. She insists that he has some hidden desires, that he wants her to be a bad girl, but again Riley rejects it. Finally they have sex, with the scene switching back and forth between Willow and Tara's spell, drawing the obvious comparison. After it's over, Riley says that he loves her, and Faith freaks out. She cannot understand the concept of non-transactional love, asking him, "What do you want from me?" All of her physical and emotional relationships have been based around a trade. Even with the mayor, who she was closest with, he still demanded her to go out and do his bidding. Even his final will was a request to get revenge on Buffy. Riley, in his farm boy ways offering pure love and devotion, is foreign to her experience. When he puts a blanket on her, she flinches away, the simple act of kindness similar to a vampire's reaction to a cross. The next morning she flees from the frat house and Forrest confronts her, calling her a killer. Faith understandably reacts explosively, and then Forrest replies, "Do you really care what I think?" Faith is someone who pretends not to care as a defense mechanism, but really, she defines her life by what others think of her. When people call her a villain or psychotic, she acts out those fantasies, even if it's not what she wants to be. The same thing occurs at the end of the episode, as while she's at the airport, all set to leave, she hears about vampires attacking a church. She then decides to play the role of a hero. The dialogue while she confronts Riley is excellent, and really demonstrates Faith's views on herself and Buffy. In the meantime, the Scoobies have sorted out the spell nonsense, and Buffy also heads to the church. The fight itself could have been improved with a few more vampires, but thematically it works well enough that the specifics don't really matter. The chapel is a place of redemption, and it's where Faith goes to take a heroic action to make the world a better place. All of that falls away when she sees Buffy in her body and they have a big fight. Faith's self-hatred explodes out as she screams at her own body that she's disgusting, murderous, and nothing. Just like in BoJack Horseman's stupid piece of shit episode, this is a realistic depiction of depression, albeit in a more fantastical setting. Eventually Buffy uses the magic doohickey, and they swap back and Faith runs away again. The episode ends with a nice shot contrasting their two positions, as Riley says that she had her fun, and Buffy offers an ironic echo. These two episodes are fantastic, and develop both Slayer's characters while still having time for others in the cast. The story is not over, however, as the Parrot Angel episodes bring more closure, but also some story beats that don't work as well as those here. Superstar is a very odd episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. This is intentional, but it also comes in a weird place in the season. It's a comedy-focused alternate universe, sort of similar to The Wish. Instead of Buffy never coming to Sunnydale, however, Jonathan, the background character who became the writer's favorite punching bag, has cast a spell to make himself Charles Atlas, amazing at absolutely everything. Of course, like most spells in Buffy, there is a cost, and a demon that is the opposite is created, stalking the residents of Sunnydale. The way this premise is communicated to the audience is fairly creative. The episode begins with the gang fighting some vampires, then they discover a lair and they say they need help. It's implied they're going to the initiative. Then Jonathan turns around in a chair like a Bond villain and it cuts to credits. The credits are then altered, one of the very few times in the series, to include a number of shots of Jonathan looking like a badass. This is definitely the funniest gag in the episode, although it is also really the only joke the episode has. Jonathan spends most of the episode being the everyman, solving the problems of the cast. He helps Buffy deal with her relationship issues with Riley after the events of the last two-parter. He plans with the initiative how to take down Adam, and he fights a bunch of vampires. Everyone in the town has hots for him, regardless of their sexuality. The only one not fooled is Adam, who recognizes that something is wrong, but apparently doesn't know enough about magic to determine what it is. While Adam has a couple scenes this episode, they highlight the big problem the writers had this season. They had no idea what to do with him. After his debut episode, which is number 14 in the season, then there are 5 episodes in a row where he doesn't have a major role. Sure, he encourages the vampires to attack the church and Who Are You, but they could have just done that naturally. His grand plan is not revealed until it's basically been enacted. Even the initiative, who should be spending every effort to hunt him down, barely have a mention. The 2 biggest plot points of the season are basically forgotten about in exchange for some Monster of the Week episodes. Superstar is not the problem with the season, but it stands out for how inconsequential it is. In the end, the magic is dispelled and everything goes back to normal. The only real change is that Buffy and Riley reconcile, which is the kind of thing that would have happened anyway. Jonathan's sexual assault is also basically ignored, as he had effectively mind-controlled 2 women to be in love with him. But it does sort of come back in Season 6 when he becomes a big bad in the trio. Despite little impact with the plot, there is some foreshadowing for Dawn's arrival next season. The episode sort of sets the stage for something is different but no one knows it. We've already had dream sequences, and the finale sets this up as well. So as an episode premise, it's not really necessary, especially this late in the season. Generally, the episode is not bad, it just feels so pointless. It exists to pass the time because the season is 22 episodes. There's some decent comedy bits, but generally it's a single joke and a dozen variations, like a few of Season 4's other episodes. If you enjoyed this one, let me know. Maybe there's something I'm missing, but for me this one is almost skippable. Where the Wild Things Are is the worst episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It has a terrible premise, questionable themes, no development for characters or the greater plot, and is genuinely uncomfortable to watch. It was written by Tracy Forbes, whose other credits are Beer Bad and Something Blue, although this is by far their poorest effort. Before wading through the swamp, however, there are positive elements to it. We get to see more interactions between Tara and the rest of the group, and unlike last episode, there is no otherworld things going on. We also get to see Giles sing, and Anthony Stewart Head proves he is a man of many talents by delivering an excellent performance. That's it. The basis for the episode is that the frat house the initiative is based under was originally a home for disenfranchised youth, run by an abusive matron who punished her pupils if they were, in her view, impure. This involved drowning them, cutting their hair off, and general verbal discipline. Now, due to Buffy and Riley having sex a lot in the house, it has unleashed a poltergeist, a spirit that has built up repressed feelings from decades past, and it's feeding off their sexual energy to cause chaos. There are problems with the premise. The first is that apparently the initiative did no research on supernatural events in the location of their secret base. Or, alternatively, no one had ever had sex before in the frat house and caused some spookiness. Neither of those make any sense. The other problem is that while Buffy and Riley having an active sex life is fine, they are unreasonably horny this episode and extremely obvious about it. It's not like they're possessed either, it's made clear the spirits only start affecting them after the first act. There are reasons behind this, and in theory it could work. Riley slept with Faith a short time ago, and this could be an overcompensation on their part, trying to erase the trauma it caused in both of them. The issue is they're acting completely out of character, and every scene feels clumsy. In The Eye and Team, we saw how them fighting together could lead to sex, but it was done in a much better way. The other part of the problem is that we already had a frat party turned into chaos episode in Fear itself, as well as the cult in Reptile Boy. Characters hang a lampshade on it, but it still feels like treading the same ground without offering anything new. The only thing that's different is there is a bunch of vegetation that keeps the Scoobies out. This might be referencing the Garden of Eden, but otherwise doesn't make sense with the other apparitions or backstory. There is a villain in this episode played by Catherine Justin. The gang go to find answers from her, and she reveals the punishment she inflicted on the children. Her performance is hammy, but that's not exactly exclusive or even bad. She only has a single scene and it's not very impactful, so even the human face of the episode falls flat. The only side plot in the episode is that Anya and Xander are having relationship problems. Because they didn't have sex one night, Anya insists they must be breaking up, despite Xander's insistence that's not the case. They go their separate ways before ending up in a frat house. Before that, however, they manage to traumatize a group of people who are waiting outside of Xander's ice cream truck, one of his many miscellaneous jobs. Despite them not having actually broken up, Xander flirts with the first girl he sees, and then plays spin the bottle with her. Anya, in the meantime, airs her grievances to Spike, but doesn't actually do anything with him, despite them having quite a bit in common, both being ex-demons. The Spike and Anya interactions are actually decent, but they still don't feel quite true to the characters. In the end, however, Anya and Xander join together to save Buffy, and in doing so save their relationship. In other words, there's no change in their dynamic from the beginning of the episode to the end. The same thing happens with Buffy and Riley, where they just don't have sex all the time in the future. Everyone just pretends this episode never happened. All of the episodes that Forbes have written have Buffy acting very out of character. In Beer Bad, she was transformed into a caveman. In Something Blue, she is love-lusted to Spike, and here she is horny and disappears for the second and third act. It seems like Forbes doesn't know how to write for her character, so found ways to avoid it. The beginning of the episode features a vampire and demon working together, and the characters discuss how it might be part of Adam's plan, but that's his only role in the episode, not even an on-screen appearance. As discussed in Superstar, this is the case for a string of episodes, but given how little else is going on, it feels especially egregious. Then there is the final nail in the coffin. The episode is just not fun to watch. I'm asexual, but even if I wasn't, the scenes with Riley and Buffy in bed are not meant to be attractive. It's meant to be uncomfortable. They're clearly not enjoying their actions, but are unable to stop. This means for a decent portion of the runtime, things are just miserable, without anything to justify sitting through it. Only reason this episode deserves to exist is Giles' performance at the espresso pump, and that could be a scene in any episode. This is the only episode I recommend skipping while watching Season 4. It is truly a waste of time. New Moon Rising is a solid episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It closes up some loose ends and propels the season towards its natural conclusion. It's the first time in a while it feels like things are moving, with Willow coming out to Buffy, Riley ditching the initiative, and Adam's plan beginning to take more shape. It begins with Tara and Willow discussing plans to buy a cat, named Miss Kitty Fantastico. This shows the development of their relationship, as they're starting to have things that are theirs, as a collective. Tara also attends her first meeting with the Scoobies, where they discuss what Adam has been up to. He has been riling up the local populations of vampires and demons, getting them to go out and get captured by the initiative. It's still not clearly established why, although it can be assumed that he plans to unleash them all at once, to bring down the organization that created him. At the end of their session, a surprise walks in the door. Oz. This is his first appearance since Wild at Heart, although there were a few episodes focused on Willow dealing with her grief and separation from him. They talk briefly as a group, then he leaves to give them space. This segues directly into the B-plot of the episode. Riley and Buffy discuss what happened between Willow and Oz, and Buffy casually mentions that he's a werewolf. Riley is taken aback, claiming that he didn't think Willow would be into bad boys. This all comes back to the black and white mentality that has been driven into him by the military, and then the initiative. Supernatural things are bad and dangerous, and there are no exceptions. Buffy of course argues that Oz is not dangerous, but simply someone afflicted with a curse. This parallels Angel's role in her life, although for now she just has oblique references, as she's still not telling Riley the full truth. They butt heads a couple of times throughout the episode due to those differing views, and when one of Riley's soldiers is attacked by a werewolf, he immediately goes on the offensive, elevating them to kill on sight. Oddly enough, this other wolf is never actually explained, as it's made clear it's definitely not Oz. It's previously mentioned that werewolves can identify others of their kind, so it's possible that it's someone who followed Oz from wherever he was coming from, but either way there's no closure on their identity or purpose. The reason why we can be sure it's not Oz is that he has studied in Tibet with monks, and can now control the beast inside. He reveals this to Willow by walking with her into the light of a full moon. They then talk all night, catching up on what has been happening in Sunnydale, with one big exception. Willow never mentions Tara, nor hints at any sort of romantic relationship. While Oz does come back into town and assumes she is available, which is certainly not a great thing to do, he is at least courteous and gives Willow space if needed. Willow, on the other hand, is being extremely deceptive, both towards Oz and Tara, instead of trying to deal with her complex feelings, simply avoiding them. We've seen elements of this before, but they will be brought to the forefront in Season 6. After Oz leaves her room, she does have a conversation with Buffy and reveals her relationship with Tara. Buffy freaks out a bit, in a way that feels realistic to many people's experiences with coming out. Even if friends or family are eventually supportive, the initial reveal can be frightening and cause friction. Buffy comes around in the course of the conversation and tells Willow the most important thing is to be honest. This is a bit hypocritical coming from Buffy, but it is the best advice for relationships. And then poor Tara, who is so desperately in love with Willow that she's willing to accept losing her as a partner, if it means they still get to be friends. There's some great acting from both Hannigan and Benson in both this and the final scene of the episode. After Willow leaves, Tara bumps into Oz and things explode. His werewolfy powers allow him to smell Willow on her, and he becomes unable to control his emotions, at Willow having lied to him, again. He wolfs out and chases Tara for a bit before being captured by the Initiative. Their werewolf makeup has never been great, especially during the day, which reduces the impact of the scene slightly. Then we get Riley's big moral dilemma, as he turns from being willing to kill the werewolf in cold blood to trying to sneak Oz out, effectively resigning from the Initiative. He's caught, but they still manage to get away, and he takes up residence in the burned-out old high school. It's a great set, and it's nice they got more use than just the one episode. The episode ends with some nice emotional moments, as Oz says his final goodbye from the show, in a way that feels much more conclusive than his first exit. Then Willow goes to Tara, and there's a lovely scene where Tara has already resigned herself to losing Willow, saying that Willow has to be with the person she loves. Willow then simply says, "I am." While their relationship will have a lot of ups and downs in the coming season, there are a lot of great moments, and as one of the first queer couples in genre TV, their existence means a lot. The episode on the whole has a lot of good emotional moments, and feels more like a classic Buffy episode, something that has been sorely missing this season. While it is mostly a Monster of the Week episode, it feels like it's tying up loose ends before we get to the plot-heavy final couple of episodes of the season, justifying its existence more than other episodes of this kind. The Yoko factor is the beginning of the end for Season 4. Finally, Adam's plans are mostly revealed, and we get confrontations that have been building for the entire season. It works because although there is a significant amount of plot stuff, there is enough space for each of the characters to have their moment. In many ways, it serves as a check into the emotional state of everyone just before the final battle, which is actually a very nice breather that a lot of previous seasons didn't have room for. The closest comparison is Becoming Part 1, and that was almost exclusively focused on Angel. Here it's a different vampire that takes the center stage, and that is Spike. While he's certainly been a significant part of previous episodes, it was mostly reactive, at least after he got the chip put in. Now he is actively making plans and gets some of his previous glory back. This episode is basically taking the scene from Doom, where he mocks Xander and Willow, and turning it into a full episode. It makes sense, fitting with his character's love of small cruelties, as well as emotional intelligence that allows him to manipulate the Scoobies. Some will say this episode took it too far, with him seemingly tearing apart year-long friendships with only a few words, but that's ignoring the greater context. There have been a few scenes throughout the season that have emphasized the growing distance between Willow and Buffy. At the beginning of the season, they told each other everything, with Willow eagerly waiting for details, without any details, of Buffy's night with Parker. Later on, there are many scenes of one or both of them returning to their room, finding the other bed empty. Even when they talk, they are keeping secrets from one another, Buffy with Riley's role in the initiative and Willow with Tara. There is also Buffy's reaction to Willow being gay. While eventually she seems to accept it, there was still a significant amount of shock and odd behavior. While next season it's made clear that Tara has become part of their found family, here there is still a distance and an unknown quality. Meanwhile, Xander has been feeling out of place all season. His friends have gone off to college, and he has bounced around between a dozen different jobs without ever finding anything that could be called a career. His only constant has been Anya, and while their relationship has developed, he is afraid of commitment, and as such does not consider it to be a permanent part of his life. Spike recognizes all of this, and goes to each of them in turn and makes an offhanded comment about an insecurity, implying that the others are dismissive of their struggles. Even Giles is affected by this, as he is still lacking a role, no longer being a watcher or a librarian. He ends up descending into the drink, and while he's not exactly an aggressive drunk, he still manages a few harmful words. This all comes to a head in a scene in his apartment, where the members of the main gang shout at each other, trying to both deny allegations that Spike has made, but also reflect on the actual circumstances that have changed. There is an amusing cut where Tara and Anya are hiding in the bathroom, worrying about how long the argument is going to take. In the meantime, Angel has come to town, following up on events that happened in his titular show. In summary, Faith arrived in LA, tortured Wesley, and tried to commit suicide by Angel, but instead he took her in, trying to give her space to grow and get better. The council had other ideas in mind, and arrived toting machine guns and helicopters. Eventually they're defeated, but Faith decides to give herself up to the authorities and goes to jail. Buffy is very unhappy with the circumstances, and she and Angel fight, both with words and fists. They end the encounter on a very hostile note. Angel then decides unilaterally that he needs to go back to Sunnydale, beat up some random soldiers, and then Buffy's new boyfriend, instead of talking to her about anything. Eventually he is forced to talk to Buffy, and offers a fairly lame apology, all things considered. Most of the Angel stuff this episode doesn't really work. While him being unable to communicate fits with his character, without the context of a different series, a lot of the emotions don't work, and his actions just seem random. During the episode, Riley pulls a gun on Angel, but it will have virtually no effect, which certainly adds to the powerlessness that he feels, emphasizing how little he can do. Similarly, Buffy asks to be left alone with Angel to talk, and he refuses to leave Buffy's room, so they just go into the hallway. Riley just stands there, arms crossed, like an RA trying to prevent a young couple from having sex. Angel also offers a fairly amusing smirk as they leave. He may be an asshole, but at least he's not boring. There's also an odd moment where Buffy and Riley talk about what's happened, and she says, "Have I ever given you a reason to not trust me?" She seems to believe she hasn't, and Riley agrees with her, but frankly, Buffy has lied to him a lot. First with her Slayer identity, although that was somewhat understandable. Then she trickle-truthed him about Angel, first in introducing him as a concept when discussing Faith, then later she told Riley everything, except the fact that it was them having sex that triggered his evil side. Xander is the one to reveal this, but unlike many of his other interactions around Buffy, he wasn't intentionally doing it. After all of this, she reveals that Adam killed Forrest, and then Riley leaves. Initially it appears he was just upset, but actually was a chip being activated in his chest, effectively mind-controlling him. This is an odd last-minute addition that doesn't really fully come together. This episode does have a few of the trademark Season 4 comedic moments. Willow and Tara finally get their cat, and they admire its cuteness collectively. It's a nice, small scene that also helps to highlight how far apart Buffy and Willow have grown, which makes Spike's later comments hit harder. There's also a second scene of Giles singing, and the little gasp is one of the funniest parts of the episode, and possibly the season. During the final scene of the episode, after the big argument, Buffy says there is no prophecy about a chosen one and her friends. This is of course contrary to the entirety of the series so far. Her relationships, both romantic and platonic, are what separate Buffy from other Slayers, and what have allowed her to survive so long. Many Slayers die before they're 18, and not even to any apocalyptic threat. Spike himself has killed 2 Slayers, and while he's certainly renowned for it, otherwise he is a fairly bog-standard vampire. While this episode does depict the cracks that have formed in the group, it also makes it clear that they still love and care about each other, and that's what ultimately allows them to defeat Adam, a foe that Buffy has faced multiple times and had no chance against. Buffy's connections are her greatest strength, although that payoff won't be until next episode. Primeval is the action-packed finale of the season, in a sense. It's not actually the final episode, as that's when things get really weird, but it's time for the conclusion of all the major storylines. First, we have to finish off the cliffhanger from the end of the last episode, with Riley being recalled into Adam's clutches, seemingly an obedient soldier. It's immediately revealed that his body is being controlled, but his mind is not. As discussed previously, this late-game plot twist doesn't really work, thematically or on a structural level. Riley has had a few different conflicts this season. The first was hiding secrets from Buffy, the second was recognizing that the world wasn't black and white, and the third was an extension of that, discovering that not every supernatural beast is inherently evil. The idea behind the chip is that he is being literally controlled by a government who had shaped him, that he is unable to resist his programming, with the obvious comparisons to Adam. It just never quite gets there in any respect, unfortunately. We've already seen him resist the initiative, just a few episodes ago when he stood up to protect Oz, and then walking away from Maggie after she tried to kill Buffy. In both cases, it was development for his character, moving past being the mindless automaton he was trained to be. Regressing for half an episode due to a supernatural element doesn't work with the ideas that have been presented, and just feels like retreading the same ground. They also mentioned that the chip was placed near his heart rather than his brain, so that he can remove it himself, but Spike and presumably other vampires have the chip in their head. The whole idea just doesn't come together. Spike and Adam have a spirited discussion where Spike realizes that his plan to split up the Scoobies, then get them to share information, doesn't work. It feels like two comedic minions of the big bad hashing out a harebrained scheme instead of what it should be, a moment of dramatic tension where Adam's final plan is revealed. It really encapsulates the problems with Season 4, with the juxtaposition of comedy and drama not really gelling and coming into conflict with one another. There are multiple scenes this episode featuring Spike having this same tension, and none of them quite work. The Scoobies then have a post-argument hangover, although it's literal in Giles' case. The scene to highlight is Xander's, however, as he lies in bed, succumbing to the depressive thoughts that he's had all season. The idea that he hasn't grown up from being a high school loser, and all his attempts to get a job or change would be ultimately fruitless. Here, however, Anya is able to pull him out of it, expressing the real connection and love they share. That's the biggest change in his life from the start to the end of the season. He has a real romantic relationship. There's no time for slow character moments, however, as we head to the super-duper secret initiative lab with Zombie Walsh. The effects here are fine if a little cheesy. Zombie Forrest is where it goes too far, with almost every single line he utters being over the top. This is another element that, in theory, could have worked. He was Riley's best friend, and after Riley abandoned the initiative he died, thus there is an element of guilt and betrayal. There's also Forrest's unrequited love for Riley, but all of that gets replaced by generic demon roar. This is of course Adam's big plan, to have a bunch of soldiers and demons killed, then stitch them all together into an army, and then conquer the world, maybe. Or just kill a bunch more people. The plan beyond that moment is pretty unclear. The Scoobies all meet up and have a classic research session, where Xander proposes something sarcastically that turns out to be correct, and we get the enjoining spell, something that allows them to combine their skills and knowledge together into a singular being. This is the one concept from the episode that works from idea to execution. Thematically, it pushes forward the idea that Buffy's real strength comes from her relationships, and despite growing further apart from the people in her life, the core strength still remains, allowing her to accomplish things that would be impossible otherwise. It also presents the idea of the Slayer as more than a single individual, something that's explored more in future seasons. She represents a whole lineage of women who have all given up their lives to fight evil and keep the world safe. Eventually those past Slayers will come to haunt her, but also to guide her, offering her the opportunity to make the right choices where they failed. Before any of that, however, the Scoobies have to infiltrate the initiative, again. This is probably the third or fourth time they've either done it or talked about doing it. This time, they do it Mission Impossible style, rappelling down the elevator shaft. While doing this, Willow and Buffy have an intense and loud heart-to-heart, dealing with some of the emotional issues they've been experiencing throughout the season. While the dialogue itself is not bad, having it take place here makes it feel like the writers ran out of room in the season for this reconciliation to happen, so just shoved it into a space that it doesn't quite fit. Once they all reach the bottom of the elevator shaft, they're immediately caught, which is unsurprising on a macro level, as that's probably how it should have happened the last few times. They have a conversation with the generic general character, where he displays the expected level of overconfidence and bravado. Adam takes the opportunity to release all the holding cells, unleashing a horde of demons and starting off the destruction of the initiative. These scenes generally work pretty well, showing off the scale of the conflict, with the number of casualties on both sides shown. It again reinforces how incompetent the initiative is, but that's been the running theme throughout the season. Continuing that, they leave 2 guards to make sure Buffy doesn't escape, which lasts about 3 seconds after they leave the room. The gang managed to discover the super secret lab after looking at the plans for 30 seconds, and head off to confront Adam and do their enjoining spell. Buffy has to go first in order to give him time, and confronts Forrest and the zombies. Adam, instead of finishing her off, decides to wander away and assume his one incompetent underling will get the job done, thus ticking off a few more items on the evil overlord list. Do people even know that reference anymore? It might be too 2000s internet for today. Buffy's conflict with Forrest is another one that's been building up the entirety of the season, but instead of coming to a head in a satisfying emotional conflict, it's simply a standard fight. If instead of becoming a zombie, Forrest had been convinced by Adam that Buffy was a threat to Riley and the initiative, and he was a willing ally rather than a mindless automaton, that could have been something, but alas. Despite Buffy having trouble fighting him off, she eventually decides to let a severely injured Riley take her place, and he holds his ground surprisingly well. Buffy then confronts Adam, who instead of fighting his adversaries was just watching TV. It's yet another scene that showcases how inept of a big bad Adam is. While there's certainly ideas that can work, Frankenstein is a classic for a reason. They never formed a cohesive whole. In most scenes, Adam is just standing around waiting for things to happen. The few occasions when he makes use of his charisma and intelligence are good, but they're too rare to make an impact. His plan of an army of cyberdemons is also not different enough from the others to stand out, as it's ultimately about power, whatever form that takes. Even in his final scene in the last episode, he reveals another trait, that he's been making upgrades to himself and unveils a machine gun. A final combat trick is understandable, but his upgrades have never been mentioned before, and seem unnecessary from his point of view. When Buffy previously fought him, she couldn't do anything, she was entirely outmatched physically, so there is no narrative need for him to change. That's enough harping on Adam as a concept, as we finally get to see the results on the enjoining spell, and it's pretty neat. Her utter dismantling of Adam feels satisfying, and the effects are fairly decent. It also shows how powerful magic is in the Buffyverse, as she effectively turns into Neo from the end of the Matrix, which was released about a year before this episode. This also features Adam at his most emotive, which is communicated effectively despite the heavy makeup. His desperation and fear shine through. The final scene of the episode features some white men in suits discussing the failure of the initiative and how they'll cover everything up and pretend like it never happened. As revealed in Season 8, that wasn't forever, but that's a long way away now. And that's the finale of the season, effectively. The end of the main plot. And then there's just one more episode. And it's a bit of a doozy in terms of analysis. Restless is the true finale of Season 4, and arguably the strangest episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's structured as 4 separate dreams, with very brief introduction and epilogue. While dream sequences are typical for the series, having the entire runtime focus on them make this one truly unique. It's gradually revealed this is the result of the enjoining spell that was cast in order to defeat Adam, and that by sharing their knowledge and power in that way, it created a magical and spiritual link not only between themselves, but also the Slayer as a concept and an individual, as the first Slayer ends up hunting them all through their dreams. A brief note before we start, however. This episode foreshadows about half the remainder of the series, and while some things will be talked about obliquely, it's unavoidable that there will be spoilers. If that's a problem, just skip this review. Otherwise, enjoy, and just remember that I've got a Patreon where you can see any episodes that required changes to fit YouTube's algorithm in their original, unaltered state. Each character sequence focuses on 2 or so themes, as well as reflecting on events in the past and foreshadowing future ones. The episode begins with Willow's, and centers around her fear that she's still the same scared high school girl, a geek and a loner that others merely tolerate rather than like. This was previously addressed in Doomed and the Yoko Factor, but it makes sense to keep returning to it, as Willow's insecurities are central to her character, and will keep causing conflict for the remainder of the series. The second thematic focus for Willow is her love of Tara. That's how the dream begins, its middle, and in the end. Willow is distracted by her, allowing the first Slayer to get to her. Tara is the most new thing in her life, and despite the immense bond the two have, shown through dialogue here and in New Moon Rising, there is still a fear that something's going to go wrong. She's come out of the closet to her closest friends, but it's still unfamiliar territory. This is demonstrated visually in the yonic red curtains that Willow travels through to find Tara, and how she hides them, still unwilling or unable to come fully into the light. Despite Whedon's claims, this also appears to be a reference to the dream sequences in Twin Peaks, which have similar hue and style. In terms of foreshadowed events, there are two main ones. The first is Tara's backstory, which will be revealed next season in Family. Tara comments that Willow doesn't know who she really is, or what she is, but that their bond would be strong enough to withstand anything. Again, these messages are repeated both through the dialogue, cryptic as it is, and visually. In this case, Willow is painting a message on Tara's naked back. That is in ancient Greek. It's a love letter to Aphrodite from Sappho, and says broadly, if she does not love, soon she shall love, even unwilling. This foreshadows the events around Once More with Feeling, where Willow will use her magic to make Tara forget an argument, ignoring Tara's warnings and consent. This ties into the second event, which is Willow's misuse of magic. This has been a minor running note since the beginning of Season 3, although it really escalates in Season 6. There is talk of power and her friends not knowing the real her, which will culminate in a blow-up that makes a one this season seem like a minor argument. The final notable event foreshadowed is her reading out a book report on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. She's already gone through the looking glass by being introduced to the world of the supernatural via Buffy. The question remains, however, whether she will be a good witch or an evil one. Buffy is also clearly represented by Aslan, as she has the courage and strength of a lion, and also dies before being resurrected. It should also be pointed out that this episode maintains Season 4's trademark humor, and it mostly works. The dream conceit allows for more absurdism than usual, but even casual lines like, "Your whole family's in the front row, and they look really angry," elicit quick joy. Then we move on to the next image or idea. Willow's dreams reflect those who have been lost in various ways. One of the star performers in the adaptation of Death of a Salesman is Harmony, who has died and become a vampire. Oz is shown in the classroom flirting with Tara, a reminder of his betrayal in Wild at Heart, while also visualizing Willow's fears for a future relationship. Harmony also reminds Willow of her vampire self seen last season, and in doing so, comments on how quick things can change. One magic spell, one wish, and the whole world is different. Willow's play also features Riley, demonstrating both that Willow and the audience think of him. He says he came early, so I got to be the cowboy guy. His character will arrive early, pick the stereotypical good guy role, and play his part, regardless of whether or not he fits. In this case, it's his role in Buffy's life that's in question. At the end of Willow's dream, she is mauled by the first Slayer, although at that point it's still unknown what the monster following her is. All the while, the class watches on, bored and uncaring, playing into her insecurities. Instead of simply being ripped apart, however, her life force is drained, a reference to the tarot cards that were used in the enjoining spell. Hers being Spiritus, referencing her magical talents. All of the deaths are brutal, and fairly terrifying by the typical standards of Buffy. They also have the Nightmare on Elm Street idea that if you die in the dream, you die in real life. Xander's dream is next, and is by far the most direct. The two primary themes are him feeling out of place in the world, and sex, sometimes at the same time. It begins with a bit of a fake-out. Xander awakes from a dream, and finds the others watching Apocalypse Now without him, albeit with Willow asleep and convulsing due to her experience with the first Slayer. The film choice is certainly apt for the Scooby Gang, although they've just finished dealing with the world-ending threat, and now have to deal with something much more personal. Xander chooses to leave the group and head upstairs, ostensibly to pee, although it also represents his separation from the group. He's also the only one to show concern for Willow, although it's dismissed by Buffy, as Willow being a faker, tying back into her dream. While upstairs, we get the first confirmation that this is a dream, as Joyce comes on to Xander while wearing a red dress, indicating passion or lust. While there is not a huge amount of color theory in this episode, there are a few obvious examples. While Joyce looks like an adult, she speaks like a teenager, as she was in Band Candy. This shows Xander's maturity, or inner monologue, unable to even imagine an adult woman being interested in him, transposing mind and body. While in the bathroom, Xander slowly turns toward the camera in a meta-joke, before it's revealed he's in an initiative testing facility, with a dozen or so people watching him do his business. This relates to his feelings of inadequacy, as he feels like everyone is watching him, or judging him, and he doesn't measure up to their expectations. Immediately after retreating from the outside world, he ends up in his basement apartment, a place he will keep returning to after each new sequence of the dream, highlighting how trapped he feels. At the same time, there is an external threat knocking on the door, and some fairly effective moments of horror. This represents the pressure for Xander from his family, adversaries, and those who mean him harm. While we have only heard stories and oblique references, we know that despite living in the same house, he has an antagonistic relationship with them. This will come to a head in Season 6 Hell's Bells, when the true horrors of his family are compared to the literal demons of Anya's. Xander's next set piece involves a public park, with Buffy in the sandbox and Spike and Giles on the swings. This shows that while Xander may be in a negative place, in general he is optimistic, and believes that things will turn out right, and there is good in the world. Spike referring to Giles as his father also foreshadows their relationship in Tabula Rasa. Again, the theme of ennui is enforced, with Buffy asking what he is really looking for, and Xander saying he has to keep moving forward. Buffy also refers to Xander as Big Brother here, which is additional foreshadowing for Dawn's arrival next season. There are maybe half a dozen different things in this episode that point to this, as well as a few prior dream sequences. Like many dreams, there is not necessarily a spatial relationship between parts of it, as we cut from Xander in the park to Xander in the ice cream truck, watching the other Xander. This also foreshadows next season's The Replacement. This is Xander's first scene with Anya, again showing the difference in their priorities. He is her whole world, but she is just one element of his journey. She also mentions going back to being a vengeance demon, which will eventually happen. She gives Xander permission to go fulfill his sexual fantasies while she practices driving with emphatic motions, which is likely the funniest line of the episode. While Xander is turned on by Willow and Tara, he's also mocked by them, as they reference moving ahead or going places, while he feels perpetually stuck. That's why after crawling through the back of the van, he ends up right in his basement room again. What follows is a few different scenes that amount to Xander being confused and out of place, moving in all different directions, and proclaiming himself a comfortador, not a soldier or a fighter. In the end, despite all his efforts, he ends up back in the basement, and the First Slayer reveals herself as a manifestation of his father, and then rips his heart out, just as he was the heart for the enjoining spell. Giles is next, and his is the shortest and simplest. This is largely because he's a full-grown adult with a much more assured sense of self. That's not to say he doesn't have his own issues, but he's able to approach them in a healthier way. He begins by talking with Buffy about tradition, how women and men have behaved since the beginning of time, referencing the Slayer and Watcher dynamic, but of course he no longer fits in the paradigm. Giles' dream is largely about his role in Buffy, and the group's life. He is Buffy's father figure, and that will always be true. His first thoughts are of Buffy, and he leads her around a carnival, but sometimes his role conflicts with that of an authority figure. In Helpless, which is also referenced with the hypnotism, he poisoned her on the command of the Watcher's Council, but by stopping the experiment, he was thrown out and forced to adapt. In the coming seasons, he will fear that he becomes Buffy's crutch, stopping her from growing as a person. That's most apparent in Once More with Feeling, but is a running theme. In Spike's crypt, his confusion mounts, as in the background he sees Olivia weeping over a baby stroller. This is a life he could have had if he didn't pursue fighting the forces of darkness. Instead of having a biological child, he had Buffy, but there are complications involved with that, as her role as a Slayer constantly puts her in mortal danger. Her surviving for even 4 years is longer than most Slayers, who average less than a year after they're called. In many ways she is a miracle, not the least because she did die during her first year, and it was only a bit of CPR magic that kept her going. Next is research, a constant facet of Giles' life. He, along with Xander and Willow, are at the Bronze looking for answers in books that they are never going to find. Willow says it's his fault, referring to the enjoining spell, and again Giles has to contend with the fact that he put young people in his charge in danger. He comes to the realization through song, the third time he sings this season. Unfortunately, it's a tad too late, as after following a chord into a mass, referencing his confusion over the nature of his pursuer, he is scalped. Again, the method is due to his role as the intellect in the enjoining spell. Buffy's is the final dream, and begins in her college bedroom. Anya is in Willow's bed, and her next guide is Tara. In both cases, they fulfill the role that would normally be Willow's, but as she's suffering from the attacks of the First Slayer, other characters have to take on the responsibilities. After a jump scare from this Slayer, Buffy wakes up in her normal bedroom, the one we've seen in many visions before. Buffy's dream is about her role in life. Unlike Xander, she has a large amount of certainty. She is the Slayer. It's not her job or her hobby. It's who she is, until the moment she dies. Some people, like the Initiative, want to use that for their own gain. While they weren't particularly effective about that, Her dream shows what could have been. We also see Adam's human form, which could have been communicated better. He refers to Buffy as a fellow demon, which is another facet of being the Slayer that Buffy will fight against. One of the recurring ideas about the Slayer is that death is her gift. She's been given great power to destroy, to kill and maim and murder. Faith took this to a natural extreme, but the whole idea behind the original Slayer was to curse a line of women with great physical power, and then dominate them mentally through the Watcher's Council. Death was their gift because that was all they were supposed to do. Buffy has bucked this trend and created a life for herself, with real relationships and even love. However, that doesn't necessarily apply to Riley, who is seen in Buffy's dream as a cold government man, exactly what the Initiative designed him to be. He's taken a higher-up position in the government and is plotting world domination. Instead of sharing his accomplishments with Buffy, he's moved on, foreshadowing his leaving next season, as well as the separation between them. Like most of the dreams, in addition to seeding events for the future, there's also commentary on the past. In this case, after demons are let loose, Riley immediately says they should make a fort, and Adam says they should get pillows. Of course, this is referring to how ineffective the Initiative has been this entire season, being both responsible for the big bad and unable to do anything to resist him. Buffy embraces her Slayer heritage with a mask of mud, and then ends up in a desert, where she confronts the first Slayer. Here they speak through Tara, who has been a spiritual go-between throughout the episode. Buffy again pushes that she is not alone, that the way the things were done in the past has no bearing on how she functions, and are actively detrimental. The system of Slayers and Watchers were more about control than combating evil. Buffy makes a point that the first Slayer is not the source of her power, but merely the history of it. In the end, the first Slayer is defeated in the same way that Freddy is, by simply not being afraid. A recurring motif of Buffy is that facing your fears directly is the best way to go about things, and anything else causes pain and hardship. Everyone wakes from their dreams and comments on the experience. There's more foreshadowing about Dawn's arrival next season, and then it's over. Restless is an excellent episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's certainly non-traditional, but includes the staple humor, drama, and character moments that make up the show. The visuals feature incredible variety, and the references throughout feel earned rather than cheap. Unlike Hush, it doesn't work well on its own, but taken in the greater context of the show, it has much more to say. Now that the season's done, we can take a broader look at it. Coming off a sensational Season 3, whose back half was effectively entirely hits, there is a noticeable drop-off. This comes down to a few things. The first is a regression to the Monster of the Week heavy structure. While there are hints about the Initiative, it's incredibly minor in the grand scheme of things. Buffy's first real interaction is in episode 11, and it takes 3 more episodes for Adam to be created. This could work if the individual episodes were high quality, and there are examples like Hush or Faith's pair of episodes, but overall they're not. The plots are often goofy, repeat many of the same ideas and themes we've seen before, and generally don't inspire joy. Another part of this is the shift in tone. Season 4 is by far the most humor-focused season. That's not to say that the other ones don't have comedy. It's one of the pillars of the show after all. But here it moves from an occasional moment to taking the center stage. Episodes like Something Blue, Beer Bad, Living Conditions, and Superstar all hinge around a center comedic premise. Compare that to Season 3's Band Candy and The Zeppo, and it's a huge difference. Even in the dramatic episodes, however, there is still a focus on comedy. Adam bounces between being intimidating and being the straight man for Spike or other vampires. Of course, Adam himself is also one of the problems with this season. It's already been discussed how much he fails as a villain, but it bears reinstating that the last 2 big bads were Angelus and the Mayor, and Glory is upcoming. While she's certainly more controversial than the others, there is still a huge gap in the emotional impact of the villains, how entertaining they are, and how intimidating, and Adam falls short in every regard. In terms of characters, the season is very mixed. Despite being the titular hero, Buffy's development is fairly limited. She grows apart from her high school friends and mom, but without reaching much of an emotional conclusion. Her experience with Parker taught her to be more cautious with men, but similar lessons were learned with Angel. The Buffy at the end of the season bears a strong resemblance to the Buffy at the start. Willow, on the other hand, has gone through quite a year. She's developed a lot more confidence, seen in how she approaches the Wicca group and magic in general. She's also broken up with Oz and fell in love with Tara, and despite issues with how she treated both of them, in the end she is able to have faith in herself and come out of the closet. In Restless, we see that she still has concerns deep down about being a nerd or not being good enough, but those are things that she will work on for the next few seasons. Xander is aimless in his life after high school, and stays that way for basically the entirety of the season. He bounces from job to job, trying to find something with meaning but never quite gets there. In the finale, he is the heart of the team, and that's also where he's developed most. His relationship with Anya has been the biggest change in his life, and what will allow him to actually achieve some stability and success, albeit next season. Giles is in a similar place to Xander, a librarian without a library, a watcher without a slayer. Unlike Season 2, he doesn't have a romantic arc, and while he spends much of the season trying to research the Commandos, it turns out that Buffy found all their secrets without telling him. This really highlights his experiences this season, out of touch with where he needs to be. His support and care for Buffy are still highlighted, but he certainly fell by the wayside. In terms of other minor characters, we get the proper introduction of Anya, and she becomes a staple within the group. Generally, she is comic relief, but she offers a firm emotional core and amplifies most scenes she's in. Riley is here. Oz has left, choosing to pursue a movie career over the show. It's unfortunate to lose the character, but it's made way for Tara, who's a great addition to the cast. She offers an outsider perspective, but with enough emotional intelligence to give advice when needed. We still don't know much about her history, but next season we'll expand on this. Spike has also become a main character this season, switching roles a few times, but ultimately act as a thorn in the Scooby sides. He's both overseen and underutilized, but again next season we'll be able to develop the seeds into more interesting storylines. The common thread of all the characters is that things are built up but will be resolved later. In many ways, Season 4 feels like a sophomore slump, a gap year to help bridge into better things to come. It's not bad, and there are standout episodes and storylines, but ultimately the cons of the season are more memorable than its positive elements. That's it for Season 4. If you've watched all of these, I want to thank you very much. I know it's taken longer to make than I had originally anticipated, but at least we got finished. Eventually. There will likely be a bit of a gap between Season 5, but stay tuned. Thank you for watching, and be well.